Hi angels! This is Quirkless Society Experiment by the Angel Demon on AO3. Summary. Quirkless Society Experiment follows Class 1A as they train without their quirks, confronting their own vulnerabilities and discovering that true heroism goes beyond power. Through shared challenges, the students develop resilience and form unbreakable bonds, learning to trust and support one another. By the end, they return to their training with a renewed sense of purpose and unity, ready to face the future as a stronger, closer team of heroes. Chapter 1, The Announcement. The quiet hum of conversations filled UA's Grand Assembly Hall as students from Class 1A and 1B filed in, each wearing a mixture of curiosity and confusion. The pro-heroes stood at the front, their faces uncharacteristically serious. Even present Mike, usually so animated, was somber as he took his place beside Aizawa, who looked as calm and unfazed as ever. Yet, something in Aizawa's gaze gave away that even he felt the weight of what was about to happen. Principal Nizu climbed onto a small platform behind the podium, with All Might and the other faculty lined up beside him. As the students settled into their seats, the low murmur of voices faded, leaving an almost eerie silence. "Good morning, everyone," Nizu began, his high voice uncharacteristically serious. "Thank you for gathering here on such short notice. As you may have heard, there has been a new development in hero training regulations. The government has approved an initiative aimed at fostering greater resilience and adaptability among young heroes. UA has been chosen to pilot this initiative, given our commitment to innovation and excellence in hero education." The students exchanged glances, whispers rising once again. Midoriya Izuku glanced around, noting how tense everyone looked. He could feel his own heart rate spike, a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Nizu's expression softened, as if he anticipated their apprehension. This experiment will require all Hero Course students to wear quirk suppression bracelets, nullifying their quirks, for the remainder of this academic year. A collective gasp filled the hall. Izuku felt his stomach drop. Memories of his quirkless past resurfaced, the endless days of feeling like he was missing a piece of himself. He looked over at Todoroki, who was sitting in stunned silence, his usually calm eyes wide with disbelief. Bakugo, on the other hand, was glaring as if someone had just insulted his entire existence. "What the hell is this supposed to prove?" Bakugo's voice rang out, unrestrained and furious. He rose to his feet, fists clenched. "We're here to become heroes. How are we supposed to do that without our damn quirks?" Aizawa's eyes narrowed, and his tone was firm yet calm. "This experiment is designed to challenge your reliance on your quirks. In real combat, in real life, there may be times when your quirk isn't available, or when it's compromised. Being a hero means being prepared for every situation, and that means building the skills to adapt and protect others, quirk or no quirk." Izuku swallowed, processing the enormity of the challenge. He'd trained for years to catch up to others with his quirk, to finally feel like he belonged. Now he'd have to relearn everything, just like before. Nizu continued, his voice soothing but firm. "This is not a punishment. Rather, it is an opportunity to develop new strengths, to deepen your knowledge of heroism, and to refine your physical and tactical skills. Think of this as a chance to learn what you're capable of, beyond your quirks." Some students nodded thoughtfully, but the majority looked bewildered, even frustrated. Kirishima put a hand on Bakugo's shoulder, trying to calm him, but Bakugo shrugged him off, muttering curses under his breath. Principal Nizu glanced around the room, letting his words sink in. "Each of you will be assigned a suppression bracelet. They will be worn at all times, including during training sessions, exercises, and daily life. These bracelets will allow us to simulate situations where your quirk might be unavailable, requiring you to respond using only your natural abilities." Nizu, All Might, stepped forward, his towering figure reassuring, even if his voice was more somber than usual. "We understand that this may be difficult for many of you, but please remember, heroism isn't about power. It's about courage, resilience, and the willingness to protect others, no matter what. Izuku could see All Might's earnestness, and it sparked a flicker of hope in him. Maybe, just maybe, he could rise to this challenge. But then he remembered his classmates, some of them had only known life with their quirks. Would they be able to adapt? Would he? Nizu addressed them one last time. You have 2 days to prepare for this transition. We understand that this may be challenging, but we have full confidence in each of you to rise above it. Think of this as another way to prove your dedication to becoming heroes. With that, Nizu stepped back, signaling the end of the announcement. Aizawa cleared his throat, glancing over the students. Dismissed. Make good use of these next 2 days. Training will resume with your quirks suppressed, so I suggest you start mentally preparing. The students began to shuffle out, conversations erupting all around as they tried to process what they'd just heard. Izuku lingered, watching the mix of emotions in his classmates. Some looked angry, others were visibly shaken. He noticed Uraraka nervously twisting her hands together, likely imagining how her combat style would change. Todoroki was silent, his usual calm gaze replaced with something uncertain. As they walked out, Bakugo stormed past him, muttering under his breath, "This is crap. I'm already the best. I don't need some stupid bracelet." Izuku wanted to say something, to remind Bakugo that this was a chance for all of them to grow, but he hesitated. He understood how Bakugo felt. Losing his quirk would feel like losing a part of himself. "Hey, Midoriya," Kirishima's voice brought him back to reality. He looked up to see his friend grinning, though his usual enthusiasm was somewhat subdued. "Crazy, right? But, I dunno, I kind of get it. Heroes aren't just their quirks, you know?" Izuku nodded, offering a small smile. "Yeah. It'll be an adjustment. But maybe we can all learn something from it." "Exactly." Kirishima gave him a friendly pat on the back. "We'll just have to stick together and push through, right?" As they made their way out of the hall, Izuku felt a renewed sense of determination. This was his chance to prove that his strength went beyond One for All, that he could still be a hero even without the power he'd fought so hard to gain. But he couldn't shake the nervousness gnawing at him. He looked down at his wrist, imagining the suppression bracelet that would soon be there, a constant reminder of the limits he'd once faced. He had overcome them once. Could he do it again? Only time would tell. Chapter 2, Struggles Begin. The early morning sun cast long shadows across UA's training grounds as Class 1A gathered for their first official quirkless training session. The air was cool, but the tension among the students was thick, making the atmosphere feel stifling. Each student wore a quirk suppression bracelet around their wrist, the small device lightweight yet oddly foreboding. Izuku rolled his wrist experimentally, feeling the strange sensation of being disconnected from One for All. It was a hollow feeling, as if a part of him was missing. He looked around, noting the anxiety etched on many of his classmates' faces. Even Bakugo, who usually bristled with energy, was strangely subdued, his jaw clenched as he kept his gaze fixed ahead. "All right, everyone," All Might's voice boomed, breaking the uneasy silence. He stood at the front with Aizawa beside him, both exuding a steady calm that seemed out of place amidst the students' nervous energy. "Today, we'll start with basic physical training. Without your quirks, you'll have to rely solely on your natural strength, agility, and endurance. This exercise will help us gauge where each of you stands physically, quirkless." He emphasized that last word, his gaze sweeping over the class. Izuku felt a pang of familiarity. He'd spent most of his life training quirkless, relying on physical conditioning alone. But for many of his classmates, this would be uncharted territory. Aizawa's voice cut through the air, blunt and direct. "You'll be running a timed obstacle course. Climbing walls, crawling under low beams, scaling ropes, without your quirks. This will challenge your stamina and your ability to strategize without relying on your usual abilities. Remember, speed isn't everything here, we're looking for technique and adaptability." The students murmured among themselves, some more apprehensive than others. Kirishima gave Bakugo a reassuring clap on the back, but Bakugo just scowled, muttering, "I don't need strategy to run a damn obstacle course." "Alright, line up," Aizawa ordered, and the students moved into position at the starting line. Izuku could feel his heart pounding, both from anticipation and a flicker of excitement. Maybe, without their quirks, he'd have a chance to keep up with the others. As the first few students took off, Izuku watched closely, analyzing their movements. Uraraka struggled on the climbing wall, and used to relying on her own weight, without the benefit of her zero-gravity quirk. Ida, who usually excelled at anything involving speed, found himself lagging as he climbed over the wall, his long legs unable to power him through the obstacle with his usual efficiency. When it was Izuku's turn, he took a deep breath and focused. Running forward, he approached the climbing wall and used a technique he'd studied from past heroes, shifting his weight and using his legs to push upward while keeping his center of gravity low. It wasn't perfect, but he managed to reach the top without too much trouble. Bakugo was right behind him, moving with his usual ferocity but clearly frustrated by the absence of his explosive quirk. He growled as he struggled to pull himself over the wall, his face twisted in a rare expression of frustration. "Damn it!" Bakugo spat as he dropped to the other side, panting. "This is ridiculous." Izuku landed beside him, breathing heavily but managing a supportive smile. It's different, for sure. But think of it as another way to test ourselves." Bakugo shot him a glare, his eyes sparking with irritation. "Don't talk down to me, Deku. I don't need you telling me how to handle this." Izuku held up his hands in a placating gesture, realizing it was better not to press him. Bakugo was going to have to find his own way to adapt, but Izuku couldn't help feeling a little sympathy. For Bakugo, this must have felt like a betrayal of his hard-earned skills. They continued through the course, each obstacle revealing a new challenge without their quirks. When they reached the rope climb, Todoroki hesitated, glancing down at his hands. Izuku realized Todoroki had never needed to rely on his raw strength alone, his quirk had always been there to compensate. Now, he looked almost vulnerable. "You can do it, Todoroki." Uraraka called out from below, offering an encouraging smile. Todoroki nodded, determination replacing his uncertainty. He gripped the rope and slowly began to pull himself up, his face etched with concentration. Izuku found himself silently cheering him on. Todoroki's progress was slow, but with each pull, he grew more confident, eventually reaching the top with a small smile of accomplishment. Izuku continued, focusing on his technique, feeling grateful for all the physical training he'd endured in his quirkless days. As he cleared the final obstacle, he heard a round of applause from All Might, who was observing from the sidelines. "Well done, Midoriya." All Might called out, a note of pride in his voice. "You're adapting well." Izuku's cheeks flushed, a warm sense of pride blooming in his chest. But as he looked back, he noticed the frustration still evident on many of his classmates' faces. This wasn't going to be an easy journey for any of them. Once everyone completed the course, Aizawa gathered the group, his expression as impassive as ever. "This was just the first exercise. You'll be doing similar drills daily, gradually increasing in difficulty. This is an endurance test as much as it is a physical one, so I suggest you mentally prepare for the weeks ahead." Bakugo scoffed, crossing his arms. "We're heroes. We don't need to waste time with this quirkless nonsense." Aizawa's gaze sharpened, and his tone was steely. "Being a hero means being prepared for anything. You're not training to be one-dimensional fighters. You're training to be adaptable, resilient, and resourceful. If you think you're above that, you're in the wrong program." The class fell silent, Bakugo's defiance deflating under Aizawa's piercing gaze. Even Bakugo, for all his confidence, couldn't ignore the weight of Aizawa's words. Izuku felt a surge of respect for his teacher. Aizawa wasn't just training them to use their quirks, he was teaching them to become true heroes, ones who could adapt to any situation. As the students dispersed, exhausted but thoughtful, Izuku found himself reflecting on the day's challenges. For the first time, he felt like he had an advantage, something he could share with his classmates who were struggling to adapt. Maybe he could help them see that strength came from more than just their quirks. And as he looked at the suppression bracelet on his wrist, he felt a spark of determination. This experiment might be difficult, but it was also an opportunity, a chance for all of them to discover what it really meant to be a hero. Chapter 3: New Friendships, New Tensions. The students of Class 1A gathered in Training Ground Beta, a familiar space, but with an unfamiliar challenge. Aizawa had informed them the night before that they'd be working in pairs for the day, focusing on skill-building exercises that would test their ability to function as a team without relying on quirks. Izuku felt a ripple of curiosity as he scanned his classmates, wondering who he'd be paired with. The anxiety from yesterday's quirkless training session had faded into a more determined resolve, though he knew that some of his classmates, particularly Bakugo, were still on edge. "All right, listen up." Aizawa's voice cut through their murmured conversations. "Today's exercise will emphasize teamwork, trust, and adaptability. You'll need to rely on your partner's strengths as much as your own. Without quirks, every advantage matters, so pay attention and support each other." He began reading off pairs, and the reactions varied. Some students exchanged nervous glances, while others looked relieved. When Aizawa finally called, "Midoriya, you're paired with Shinso," Izuku felt a jolt of excitement and a bit of uncertainty. Shinso nodded at him, his expression as calm and unreadable as ever. He walked over to Izuku, his hands in his pockets, studying him with a slight smirk. "Looks like it's you and me, Midoriya. Guess we're the quirkless duo, huh?" Izuku chuckled nervously, but he felt a warmth in Shinsu's tone that he hadn't expected. He'd always admired Shinsu's resilience, especially considering his journey into the hero course hadn't been easy. "Yeah. I guess we've both had a head start with this sort of training." Shinso shrugged. "Maybe. But there's a difference between being used to it and thriving without a quirk. Let's see how well we do." Aizawa continued, "The exercise will involve navigating a course full of obstacles and retrieving a set of colored flags hidden throughout. Each team has a different color to find, and you'll need to rely on strategy and communication to succeed. No quirks, and no shortcuts." The students began moving toward the starting line, where the course awaited them. It was sprawling, with walls to climb, beams to balance on, and narrow spaces to squeeze through. Izuku felt a thrill of anticipation, though he could see some of his classmates looking less confident. As he and Shinso approached the start of the course, Izuku glanced at his partner. "So, what's our strategy?" Shinso thought for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the obstacles. "We should focus on efficiency. Don't waste energy where we don't have to. You're good at analyzing situations, so I'll follow your lead. But if something looks too risky, let me know. We don't need any heroes here, just smart decisions." Izuku nodded, appreciating Shinsu's pragmatism. They both knew that the exercise wasn't about proving themselves individually, but working together to make it through. The whistle blew, and pairs began tackling the obstacles. Izuku and Shinso started with the wall climb, using the technique Izuku had practiced the previous day. Shinso followed his lead, watching him closely and mirroring his movements. They reached the top with minimal effort, already finding a rhythm together. As they moved through the beams, Izuku noticed Uraraka and Ashido nearby, struggling to balance without using their quirks. Uraraka's concentration was intense as she teetered, her arms outstretched, while Ashido encouraged her from behind. Izuku gave them an encouraging nod before refocusing on his own task. Shinsu's low voice brought him back. "Look, there's a flag hidden over there." He pointed to a narrow crevice, just beyond a cluster of stacked barrels. "It's our color, green." Izuku spotted it too, and made a quick plan. "Okay, I'll go in and grab it." You keep watch and let me know if anyone else is coming this way. Shinso nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the area as Izuku slipped into the crevice. He crouched low, reaching for the flag, and felt a surge of satisfaction as his fingers closed around it. He emerged, flag in hand, and Shinso gave him a quick thumbs up. Nice, Shinso murmured, taking the flag from him and tucking it into his pocket. That's one down. As they moved to the next section of the course, Izuku felt his respect for Shinso growing. He was observant and calm under pressure, qualities that Izuku admired and was beginning to rely on. Elsewhere, Todoroki and Bakugo were making their way through the course, though the atmosphere between them was noticeably tense. Bakugo, still clearly irate about the quirkless training, kept charging ahead without consulting Todoroki, who was watching him with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. Stop rushing, Todoroki finally snapped as Bakugo scrambled over a beam and nearly missed a foothold. Bakugo scowled, glaring back. Just keep up, half and half. I don't need you slowing me down. Todoroki crossed his arms. This isn't about speed. We're supposed to work together. Their bickering drew the attention of other students, some of whom shook their heads or rolled their eyes. Kirishima, passing by with Kaminari, laughed softly. Those two. I swear, they're like fire and ice. Izuku and Shinso managed to find two more flags, working in sync as they navigated the course. Shinso was adept at spotting hidden flags, and Izuku's agility allowed him to retrieve them quickly. By the time they reached the final section, they had collected all their assigned flags, and Izuku felt a surge of pride in how well they'd done. As they crossed the finish line, Aizawa was there, clipboard in hand, taking notes on each pair's performance. He nodded approvingly as they handed in their flags. Good work, Midoriya, Shinso. You worked efficiently. Keep that up. Izuku beamed, and even Shinsu's usually stoic face softened with a hint of satisfaction. Other pairs began trickling in, some with more flags than others. Bakugo and Todoroki arrived next, though it was clear that their teamwork had been more competitive than cooperative. Aizawa merely raised an eyebrow, saying nothing as they handed over their flags with barely concealed frustration. Once all the pairs had finished, Aizawa gathered them for a final debriefing. Today's exercise highlighted the importance of communication and trust. Without your quirks, you had to rely on your own instincts and abilities, as well as on each other. Some of you adapted well. Others, his gaze flicked briefly to Bakugo and Todoroki, still have a ways to go. Bakugo scowled, crossing his arms defensively, while Todoroki remained impassive. Aizawa continued, this exercise will be repeated with different partners throughout the week. Get used to relying on each other, because this won't be the last time your quirks won't be an option. As they were dismissed, Izuku glanced at Shinso, feeling a newfound appreciation for their partnership. Thanks for working with me, Shinso. I feel like we really found a rhythm. Shinso gave him a small nod, the hint of a smile on his face. You're not bad, Midoriya. For someone who used to be quirkless, you seem comfortable with it. I respect that. Izuku blushed slightly, surprised by the compliment. I guess. I never forgot how to work without it. And I'm glad I could do that with you. They parted ways, each reflecting on the day's challenges. For Izuku, the exercise had shown him that quirks weren't everything, and that sometimes, working together could bring out strengths they didn't even know they had. But as he glanced back, catching sight of Bakugo's stormy expression, he knew not everyone felt the same way. The road ahead was going to be long, and for some, it might take more than teamwork to truly adapt. Chapter 4, A Glimmer of Progress. The morning sun was warm as Class 1A gathered once again on the training grounds. Though the fatigue of the last few days was evident on their faces, something else had started to emerge, a steely determination, tempered by the early struggles of adapting to their quirkless limitations. Aizawa watched them with his usual calm demeanor, but Izuku caught a glimmer of something close to pride in his gaze as he looked over his students. "Today, we'll be focusing on an advanced wall climbing exercise," Aizawa announced, gesturing to a towering wall with several narrow ledges and sparse handholds. "This challenge is about using your body efficiently, understanding leverage, and thinking strategically. Those of you who typically rely on quirks for mobility will need to work especially hard to find techniques that fit your strengths." Izuku's gaze drifted to Todoroki, who was observing the wall with a determined look. Yesterday's exercise had been a hard pill to swallow for him. He wasn't used to feeling limited, especially physically. But today, there was a different glint in his eye, a quiet resolve that Izuku recognized as the start of genuine adaptation. One by one, Aizawa called on students to attempt the wall. Ashita went first, her athleticism on full display as she carefully chose her handholds and balanced her weight. Though she stumbled a few times, she managed to make it to the top, grinning triumphantly as she looked down at her classmates. Next up was Todoroki. He took a deep breath, stepping forward and examining the wall carefully, as if memorizing each ledge and possible path. Izuku watched closely, silently cheering him on. Without his ice to create platforms or his fire to blast upward, Todoroki's usual techniques were unavailable, forcing him to rely entirely on physical strength and balance. He started up the wall, his movements slow and deliberate. At first, he wobbled slightly, clearly not accustomed to relying solely on his own body for climbing. But as he ascended, a change occurred. He began finding a rhythm, using his legs to propel himself while his hands maintained steady holds. Step by step, he climbed higher, a faint smile appearing as he reached the halfway point. The class watched in silence, sensing the significance of Todoroki's progress. Finally, with one last push, he pulled himself over the top, breathing heavily but visibly proud of himself. A few students clapped, and Todoroki gave a small, appreciative nod as he climbed back down. Aizawa nodded approvingly. "Good work, Todoroki. That's the kind of adaptation I'm looking for." Todoroki returned to his place in line, catching Izuku's eye and offering a rare smile. Izuku grinned back, feeling a surge of pride for his friend's accomplishment. As more students took their turns, Izuku prepared himself mentally. When Aizawa called his name, he stepped forward with a deep breath. This was familiar ground for him. After years of training quirkless, he knew how to rely on his body alone. But he also knew he had to prove himself, to show that he could keep up without one for all. The wall loomed ahead, challenging him with its height and limited holds. Izuku began his climb, using each ledge carefully, his muscles working in harmony as he made his way up. He could feel the strain, but he kept his focus, drawing on his analytical side to assess each movement and plan his route. His classmates watched in admiration as he climbed, his technique smooth and controlled. At the top, Izuku paused for a moment, looking down at his classmates with a smile. The sense of accomplishment was exhilarating, a reminder of how far he'd come even without a quirk. "Well done, Midoriya," Aizawa said, a hint of approval in his voice. "You've adapted well to these new limitations." Izuku climbed down, his heart light with satisfaction as he joined his classmates. Bakugo, standing nearby, was watching him with a mix of frustration and admiration, though he kept his expression neutral. As they continued through the exercise, Izuku noticed other small victories among his classmates. Siro was using his height to his advantage, carefully stretching to reach handholds that others struggled with. Yaoyorozu, usually relying on her quirk to create tools, had devised a clever technique to scale the wall by focusing on leverage and balance, using her legs to take the strain off her arms. And even Bakugo, for all his initial resistance, had started to show improvement. Though his frustration was evident, he attacked the wall with fierce determination, using his explosive energy in a different way, this time through sheer force of will. Izuku admired his resilience, knowing how difficult this must have been for someone so accustomed to using his quirk as his primary strength. By the end of the session, a subtle change had come over the group. They were tired and sweaty, but the expressions on their faces told a different story, one of hard-earned progress and a newfound respect for their own abilities. Aizawa gathered them in a loose circle, his gaze steady as he addressed them. You're beginning to understand what it means to adapt. Quirks are powerful tools, but they're not the only source of strength. Today, you proved that your bodies and minds are just as capable as your quirks. Keep pushing yourselves. He paused, allowing his words to settle. Tomorrow, you'll be working on a group exercise. This time, you'll need to combine your skills with others, coordinating without relying on any powers. It will require patience and communication, qualities that some of you still need to develop. Bakuga grumbled under his breath, crossing his arms as he shot a glare at Todoroki, who merely raised an eyebrow in response. But despite the lingering tensions, there was an undeniable sense of camaraderie forming among the students. After they were dismissed, Izuku approached Todoroki, a smile spreading across his face. You did great today, Todoroki. I could see you really focusing on using your body's strength. It was inspiring. Todoroki nodded, his expression thoughtful. Thank you, Midoriya. It's different, learning to rely on myself this way. But I think I understand now. Being a hero isn't just about having a powerful quirk. It's about finding strength within. Izuku nodded, feeling a swell of pride in his friend's words. Exactly. I think we're all learning that together. As they walked toward the dorms, Izuku spotted Bakugo ahead, still looking irritated but less defeated than before. Izuku felt a pang of sympathy, knowing how much this challenge must be testing Bakugo's pride. He hesitated, then decided to catch up to him. Bakugo, he called out, jogging up beside him. You did great today too. I know this isn't easy, but you're adapting. We all are. Bakugo scowled, glancing at Izuku with a huff. Shut up, nerd. I don't need your pep talk. I know I'm strong, with or without a quirk. Izuku laughed softly. I know. I just wanted you to know that we're all in this together. We're a team, right? Bakugo grunted, his expression softening just a little. Yeah. Just don't get used to me needing any help. With that, he stomped off toward the dorms, leaving Izuku smiling. Despite Bakugo's resistance, Izuku could see the cracks starting to form in his stubborn exterior. They were growing, each in their own way, and learning what it meant to be heroes, quirkless or not. As he made his way back, Izuku felt a renewed sense of purpose. This experiment, difficult as it was, had already begun to reveal strengths in each of them that they'd never known. And with Aizawa's guidance, he knew they would only continue to improve. For the first time since the quirkless training had started, Izuku felt genuinely hopeful. Together, they were becoming more than heroes, they were becoming resilient, capable protectors, ready for anything that came their way. Chapter 5, The First Challenge. The brisk morning air was filled with excitement and anticipation as Class 1A gathered at Training Ground Omega. This was no ordinary training area, it had been transformed into a mock battlefield, complete with obstacles, hiding spots, and towering walls. Aizawa and All Might stood at the front, studying the students with a scrutinizing gaze as they murmured amongst themselves. Today's exercise is a team challenge, Aizawa announced, his voice calm but commanding. You will be competing in a game of capture the flag. The objective is to retrieve the opposing team's flag while protecting your own. The class exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. Capture the flag was a familiar concept, but without their quirks, it would require a level of teamwork and strategic thinking that went beyond sheer power. Aizawa continued, this exercise will require you to work together, relying on each team member's unique skills and strengths. Remember, without your quirks, you'll need to plan carefully, communicate effectively, and adapt to unexpected situations. All Might stepped forward, his booming voice filled with encouragement. Each team will have a captain to lead and coordinate strategies. I expect everyone to respect their captain's decisions and play their roles as best as they can. Show us what you've learned over these past few days. Aizawa split them into two teams. Izuku was assigned to one team as the captain, while Bakugo was chosen to lead the opposing team. Izuku felt a flutter of excitement, mixed with the pressure of leading without the aid of his quirk. He knew his team would rely on him to make decisions, and he was determined to rise to the challenge. Bakugo, on the other hand, looked thrilled by the prospect of leading his team, a confident grin spreading across his face. He turned to his teammates, already barking orders. Listen up. We're taking this flag, and we're doing it fast. Stick to the plan, and don't let these losers get in our way. Izuku took a deep breath, gathering his team around him. Okay, everyone, he said, glancing at each of his teammates. We'll need a balance of offense and defense. Let's split into two groups. I'll lead the offensive team to find the enemy flag, while Todoroki leads the defense and protects ours. Todoroki nodded, already scanning the terrain with a calculating look. Got it. I'll coordinate with our defenders. If you find the flag, send a signal, and we'll create a distraction to help you escape. With the plan set, Izuku and his offensive team moved into position, quietly maneuvering through the course. Izuku had chosen Uraraka and Kurashima for the offensive team, knowing they could handle stealth and defense in a pinch. Meanwhile, Todoroki's defensive team, including Ida and Shiro, took positions around their flag, ready to intercept any attacks. As they advanced, Izuku could hear the faint sounds of Bakugo's team moving on the opposite side of the field. He motioned for his team to stay low, gesturing for them to take cover behind a stack of crates as they approached the enemy territory. His mind raced with possibilities, weighing each option carefully. We're close, he whispered, keeping his voice low. Let's split up to cover more ground, but stay within sight of each other. If you see the flag, give me a signal. Uraraka nodded, slipping into the shadows, while Kurashima took up position to watch their backs. Izuku crept forward, his eyes scanning every corner and crevice. The lack of his quirk made him feel exposed, but he forced himself to focus, relying on his instincts and his teammates. Suddenly, a rustling sound caught his attention. He ducked behind a wall, just as Kaminari appeared, looking around suspiciously. Izuku held his breath, motioning for his team to stay still as Kaminari walked past. When the coast was clear, he gave a quick thumbs up, and they resumed their search. Meanwhile, at their own flag, Todoroki's team was on high alert. Ida patrolled the perimeter, his watchful gaze catching every movement, while Shiro set up a makeshift barricade. The defensive team knew they had to be vigilant, especially with Bakugo leading the charge. Back on the offensive side, Izuku's patience paid off. He spotted a glimpse of the opposing team's flag tucked behind a stack of barrels. He signaled to Uraraka, who nodded and moved in to help. Cover me, he whispered to Kurashima, who positioned himself to intercept any potential threats. Uraraka quietly slipped forward, grabbing the flag, but just as they started to retreat, a shout rang out. Hey! They've got the flag! Kaminari yelled, alerting his teammates. Izuku's heart raced as Bakugo's team sprang into action, charging toward them. He motioned for his team to split up, hoping to create enough confusion to slow their pursuers. Uraraka handed the flag to Izuku, who sprinted toward their base, adrenaline fueling his every step. Bakugo's team closed in, with Bakugo himself leading the charge. His face was set in fierce determination, and even without his quirk, his speed was formidable. Izuku pushed himself harder, weaving through obstacles as his team provided cover. Back at the defensive base, Todoroki and Ida heard the commotion and moved into position. As Izuku approached with the flag, Todoroki motioned for his teammates to create a distraction. Shiro threw a few empty cans in another direction, causing Bakugo's team to hesitate as they briefly lost track of Izuku. Seizing the opportunity, Izuku dashed past the defenders, finally reaching their base with the flag in hand. His team cheered as he planted it, marking their victory. The exercise was over, and Aizawa blew his whistle to signal the end of the game. "Well done, Midoriya's team," Aizawa announced, his tone neutral, but respectful. "You demonstrated strong strategy and teamwork. Bakugo's team, you displayed solid offense, but remember that coordination and timing are just as important as speed." Bakugo scowled, crossing his arms as he muttered under his breath. Despite the loss, Izuku could see a flicker of respect in Bakugo's eyes, a silent acknowledgement that today, at least, Izuku's strategy had worked. All Might stepped forward, his smile broad and approving. "Excellent work, everyone. This was a fine demonstration of adaptability and teamwork. Remember, these are the skills that will carry you through even the toughest battles." As they made their way back to the dorms, Kirishima clapped Izuku on the back, grinning. "Nice job, Midoriya. You really pulled through for us." Izuku chuckled, feeling the warmth of accomplishment. "I just focused on what we had to do. Everyone played their part, and that's what made it work." Todoroki approached, nodding in agreement. "It was a solid plan. We may not have our quirks, but today proved that we're still capable as heroes." Izuku felt a surge of pride as he looked around at his classmates. They'd come a long way in a short time, and he knew they'd only continue to grow. The quirkless training was difficult, but with each exercise, they were proving that they could overcome it. As they returned to the dorms, Izuku couldn't help but glance at Bakugo, who was walking a few steps ahead, lost in thought. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Bakugo gave him a begrudging nod, an acknowledgement of Izuku's leadership, however reluctant. Izuku smiled, feeling a flicker of hope. They were learning to rely on each other, quirkless or not. And with each passing day, they were becoming heroes in ways they'd never expected. Chapter 6: Rising Tensions and Breakthroughs. The exhaustion was setting in. After nearly a week of relentless training without their quirks, Class 1's energy was visibly drained. Physical strain and the pressure of adapting to a new way of thinking had worn down even the most resilient students. As they gathered in the training grounds for another session, the usual hum of anticipation was replaced by a weary silence. Aizawa didn't look surprised. If anything, he seemed almost expectant as he took in the students' tired expressions. "Today's training will be lighter," he announced, and a few students visibly relaxed. "However, it will still challenge you in ways you haven't been tested yet." He gestured to a series of stations set up across the training grounds, each focused on a different skill. "You'll be rotating through these stations with a partner. Each one focuses on a specific area: strength, agility, endurance, or problem solving. Use this time to understand your limits and find ways to push past them." Izuku glanced around, wondering who his partner would be, when Aizawa began calling out pairs. "Midoriya, you're with Bakugo." Izuku's heart skipped a beat, and he saw Bakugo's scowl deepen as he crossed his arms. Bakugo's frustration had been simmering since the start of the quirkless training, and the tension between them hadn't exactly eased. Izuku steeled himself, determined to make the most of the pairing. "Let's get this over with," Bakugo muttered, heading toward the first station, a strength challenge involving weighted sled pushes across the field. Izuku followed, choosing his words carefully. "We can take turns pushing the sled so we don't wear ourselves out too quickly. If we find a rhythm, it'll be more efficient." Bakugo scoffed, grabbing the sled's handles. "Just stay out of my way, Deku. I don't need a lecture." Izuku stayed quiet, watching as Bakugo began pushing the sled with impressive force. But without his quirk, the weight wore him down quickly, and he slowed, his breaths coming in labored gasps. After a moment, Izuku stepped up beside him. "Let's do it together. We'll make it faster." Bakugo shot him an annoyed glance, but, surprisingly, didn't object. They positioned themselves on either side of the sled and began pushing in unison. Slowly, they found a rhythm, moving the sled with more ease as they shared the weight. To Izuku's surprise, Bakugo's harsh expression softened slightly as they reached the end of the field. Not bad, Deku. But don't think I need you to make this work. Izuku smiled, taking it as the closest thing to praise he'd get from Bakugo. I know you don't. But it's faster when we work together. The next station involved a balance challenge, crossing a series of narrow beams while holding a weighted pole for stability. Bakugo went first, his movements uncharacteristically careful as he navigated the beams. But halfway through, his frustration broke through, and he stumbled, nearly losing his balance. Izuku caught up to him, offering a steadying hand. Just take it slow. Rushing won't help. Bakugo shot him a glare, but held his tongue. With Izuku's guidance, he managed to cross the beams, muttering under his breath the whole way. By the time they reached the endurance station, which involved climbing a rope wall repeatedly, Bakugo's patience was visibly wearing thin. He threw himself into the exercise with his usual intensity, but without his explosions to boost him, his energy flagged quickly. Damn it, he spat, resting his hands on his knees as he caught his breath. This is pathetic. Izuku placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You're doing great, Bakugo. It's a lot harder without our quirks, but you're still pushing through. Bakugo looked up, his eyes flashing with frustration. It shouldn't be this hard. I'm supposed to be the best. What's the point if I can't do this without my quirk? Izuku hesitated, sensing Bakugo's genuine vulnerability for the first time. Being a hero isn't just about having a powerful quirk, he said gently. It's about finding strength, even when you're at your limits. That's what this training is teaching us. For a moment, Bakugo's expression softened, and he looked almost thoughtful. But the vulnerability quickly hardened into resolve, and he nodded, straightening up. Fine. Let's finish this, Deku. They completed the remaining stations in focused silence, finding an unexpected synergy as they pushed each other to the limit. By the end, they were exhausted, but Izuku felt a strange sense of satisfaction. He'd seen a side of Bakugo he rarely glimpsed, one that he sensed might just be the beginning of something deeper. As they regrouped with the rest of the class, Aizawa surveyed the tired students with a nod. You've all made progress, he said. Some of you have found new ways to approach these challenges, while others have begun to understand the value of relying on each other. Izuku glanced over at Todoroki and Ida, who looked similarly worn out but content. Nearby, Yaoyorozu was discussing techniques with Ishido, exchanging ideas on balance and strategy. It was clear that the exercise had pushed each of them, but the experience had also drawn them closer. Once they were dismissed, Izuku found himself walking beside Bakugo as they headed back to the dorms. The silence between them was unusually calm, lacking the usual animosity that marked their interactions. After a few minutes, Bakugo spoke, his voice low but firm. Don't think this changes anything, Deku. I'm still going to be number one. With or without my quirk. Izuku smiled, a hint of admiration in his eyes. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Bakugo. Bakugo gave him a look, one that held a grudging respect. And in that moment, Izuku sensed that maybe, just maybe, this training was forging something stronger between them, a sense of mutual understanding and respect, born out of struggle and resilience. As they reached the dorms, Izuku felt a spark of hope. They were all growing stronger, each in their own way. And with every challenge they overcame, they were one step closer to becoming the heroes they aspired to be. Chapter 7, Reflections and Resolve. The common room of the Class 1A dormitory was unusually quiet. The students sat scattered around, each lost in their thoughts, the fatigue from the week's training settling in. They were all learning to live without their quirks, but the reality of it was setting in differently for each student. For some, like Izuku, it had reignited a familiar determination. For others, like Bakugo and Uraraka, it had stirred a deeper frustration that lingered in silence. Aizawa entered the common room and glanced around, his observant eyes picking up on the mood immediately. Good. You're all here, he said, drawing their attention. Before we continue with the Quirkless training, we're going to pause and reflect on what you've learned so far. The students exchanged glances, curiosity piqued. Aizawa rarely focused on anything other than physical or tactical training, so this introspective approach was unexpected. Part of becoming a hero, Aizawa continued, his voice steady and calm, is knowing your limits and understanding your own weaknesses. I want each of you to consider what this experience has taught you, about yourselves, your strengths, and your reliance on your quirks. He gestured to a stack of journals on a nearby table. You'll each take a journal and write down your reflections. Think carefully about what you've struggled with and what you've learned. These journals are private, they're for you, not for anyone else. When you're finished, we'll regroup. One by one, the students moved to pick up a journal. Izuku took one and settled into a chair, his mind already racing with thoughts of the past week. The quiet rustle of pens on paper filled the room as they began to write. Izuku's entry. He paused, pen hovering over the page, before finally starting. This week has reminded me of what it felt like to be quirkless. At first, I was worried that I wouldn't measure up to the others, but it's been freeing, in a way. I've had to rely on my body, my mind, and my strategy, things I spent years developing. It's reminded me that being a hero isn't just about having a quirk. I think, for the first time, I'm truly understanding the kind of hero I want to be. Izuku smiled softly, realizing how much he had grown, not just in power, but in his understanding of himself. His eyes drifted across the room to Bakugo, who was scribbling furiously, his face set in a rare expression of introspection. Bakugo's entry. Bakugo clenched the pen tightly, the words coming reluctantly. I hate this. I hate feeling weak. But Deku is right, strength isn't just about quirks. It's something deeper. I don't like admitting it, but maybe I need this. Maybe, there's more to being number one than just having the strongest quirk. But damn if I'm not going to prove I can do it, with or without. He shut the journal with a snap, setting his jaw. He couldn't deny that the experience was changing him, forcing him to confront the limits he'd never acknowledged before. Todoroki's entry. Todoroki's hand moved steadily as he wrote, his face calm but thoughtful. Without my quirk, I am realizing how much of my identity I tied to my powers. But I'm more than just fire and ice. I've always been more. Maybe this is my chance to separate myself from that legacy, to finally understand who I am beyond my father's expectations. He felt a sense of quiet satisfaction as he closed his journal, a new resolve solidifying within him. After an hour of writing, Aizawa called them back together. The students exchanged hesitant glances, unsure of what to expect next. Aizawa looked at them, his gaze piercing yet understanding. Some of you may have realized that your quirks, while powerful, have also become a crutch. Others may have seen that your strength goes far beyond your abilities. Both realizations are equally important. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Today, you'll have a chance to put those reflections into action. I've set up a challenge that requires you to rely on the skills you've honed this past week. You'll be working in pairs, and each pair will face a different scenario. No quirks, only your mind and your physical skills. The pairs were assigned, and Izuku found himself paired with Todoroki. They shared a brief nod, both understanding that this challenge was a chance to push themselves and test what they'd learned. Bakugo was paired with Kirishima, who gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up, despite Bakugo's skeptical expression. Aizawa led them to the training ground, where different scenarios were set up. Izuku and Todoroki were assigned to a rescue simulation, where they would have to work together to save a training dummy from a simulated collapse. They took their positions, and Aizawa's voice crackled over the speaker. Remember, strategy and teamwork are key. Think, assess, and then act. Izuku and Todoroki surveyed the simulated debris, quickly forming a plan. Without Todoroki's eyes to clear a path or Izuku's strength to lift the rubble, they had to think carefully about each step. Todoroki spotted a narrow passage they could squeeze through, while Izuku pointed out a series of beams they could use to create leverage. They worked in sync, communicating with silent nods and gestures, moving the rubble piece by piece. It was slow and challenging, but they managed to reach the dummy together. Todoroki carefully hoisted it over his shoulder, and they navigated their way back, each step deliberate and cautious. When they completed the simulation, Aizawa's voice came over the speaker again. "Good work. You relied on strategy, not brute force. That's exactly what I wanted to see." Izuku and Todoroki shared a smile, a sense of accomplishment radiating between them. This was a different kind of success, one that didn't rely on power but on trust and intelligence. Nearby, Bakugo and Kirishima were facing a challenge that required them to navigate a complex obstacle course. Bakugo's frustration had been building, but Kirishima's encouragement helped him focus. Together, they found a rhythm, working through the obstacles with determination. By the end of the day, each pair had completed their scenarios, and the students gathered back in the common room, a renewed sense of unity among them. The week had been hard, but they had emerged stronger, not just as individuals, but as a class. Aizawa addressed them one last time. "You've all shown growth, resilience, and adaptability. Remember these lessons. Being a hero is about more than power, it's about courage, resourcefulness, and the strength to push through adversity." As they dispersed, Izuku looked around at his classmates, feeling an immense sense of pride. They were all evolving, each finding their own path toward heroism. And as he glanced at Bakugo, who gave him a subtle nod, he knew that their journey was just beginning. Together, they were becoming heroes, not just with quirks, but with hearts and minds sharpened by challenge and strengthened by unity. Chapter 8, Testing Limits. The morning was gray and overcast as Class 1A gathered at the training grounds. A chilly breeze swept through the air, heightening the tense atmosphere. The students had grown used to Aizawa's intense challenges, but today felt different. There was an edge in Aizawa's gaze as he observed them, a weight in the air that none of them could quite shake. "All right, everyone," Aizawa began, his voice low and commanding. "Today's exercise is going to be more challenging than anything you've faced in this quirkless experiment so far. The purpose is to push you past your limits, to see how well you function when you're exhausted, pressured, and forced to make quick decisions. In real-world situations, heroes don't always get a chance to rest." The students glanced at one another, some with nervous anticipation, others with quiet determination. Izuku took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anxiety and excitement. This was a chance to test everything they'd learned, to see just how far they'd come without their quirks. Aizawa continued, gesturing toward a sprawling, intricate course that had been set up across the training grounds. "This simulation will involve multiple objectives. You'll be navigating through hostile territory, rescuing civilians, training dummies, and fending off simulated attacks. Each objective is timed, and you'll need to work in rotating teams to accomplish every part." The complexity of the course was daunting, filled with tall walls, narrow crawl spaces, hidden tunnels, and several scattered civilian dummies placed in precarious positions. They would have to work fast and efficiently, balancing between speed and caution to avoid simulated traps and obstacles designed to test their reflexes. "To make this more realistic," Aizawa added, his gaze sharp, "I'll be monitoring your physical and mental condition. If I see anyone pushing past their limits irresponsibly, I'll pull you out. The point here is not just to push through, but to know when to ask for help." Bakugo scoffed, muttering under his breath, "I don't need any help." Aizawa's eyes flicked to him, narrowing slightly. "Remember, Bakugo, there's no solo act in hero work. Teamwork is key." Bakugo clenched his jaw, but he stayed silent, his fists balled as he prepared himself for the challenge. Aizawa split the students into 3 rotating teams, with Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki each leading a group. Izuku's team was assigned to the first part of the course, navigating through the maze of obstacles to retrieve a civilian dummy from a high ledge. As they reached the starting line, Izuku gathered his team, Uraraka, Ida, and Kurashima, and quickly laid out their strategy. Uraraka, you're light on your feet, so you'll go first to scout ahead. Ida, we'll need your speed for quick maneuvers. Kurashima, you'll stay in the back and cover us in case we need extra strength. I'll be in the middle to coordinate and watch for traps. They nodded, each looking determined as the simulation timer began. Uraraka took the lead, slipping into the narrow pathway between walls and scouting ahead for any potential traps. She moved swiftly and silently, motioning for them to follow when the coast was clear. Izuku kept his eyes sharp, looking for any signs of pressure plates or hidden obstacles. It wasn't long before they encountered their first challenge, a series of narrow beams stretched across a drop that would force them to balance carefully to reach the other side. Izuku led the way, taking measured steps, and his team followed, each moving with intense focus. Just as they were halfway across, a loud alarm sounded, and a barrier shot up behind them, blocking their retreat. Looks like we don't have a choice but to move forward, Kurashima muttered, his tone tense. They pressed on, reaching the other side and making their way toward the ledge where the dummy was placed. When they arrived, Izuku noticed the dummy was secured by a heavy lock. He quickly scanned the area, spotting a lever hidden just out of reach. Kurashima, can you boost me up? Izuku asked, positioning himself to be lifted. Kurashima nodded, crouching down and interlacing his fingers to create a step. Izuku climbed up, balancing precariously as he stretched to pull the lever. With a satisfying click, the lock released, and they were able to retrieve the dummy. Good work, team, Izuku said as they secured the dummy and headed to the exit. As they emerged from the maze, they handed off the dummy to the next team, led by Todoroki. His team had the task of navigating through a simulated fire zone, where they had to find a safe path through a series of obstacles that would be extremely challenging without his ice quirk. Todoroki took a deep breath, signaling his team, Yaoyorozu, Ashido, and Shiro, to follow his lead. They moved cautiously, eyes peeled for any hint of a trap. At one point, they encountered a series of narrow tunnels that required them to crawl, the path growing more treacherous with every inch. When they finally reached their objective, a dummy trapped beneath a series of heavy metal beams, Todoroki instructed Yaoyorozu to help him set up a makeshift lever to lift the beams. With teamwork and patience, they freed the dummy and hurried back, each movement careful yet efficient. Finally, Bakugo's team took on the last leg of the course, a simulated ambush scenario where they had to defend a civilian dummy while villains, remote-controlled robots, tried to intercept them. Bakugo's intensity blazed as he led his team, shouting commands to Jiro, Tokoyami, and Kaminari. His usual confidence was tempered by the realization that he couldn't rely on his explosions, forcing him to think strategically instead of charging in headfirst. As the robots advanced, Tokoyami and Jiro took defensive positions, using their agility to distract and evade the villains. Kaminari stayed close to the dummy, ready to shield it from any attacks. Bakugo's frustration was evident, but he forced himself to stay focused, channeling his intensity into a sharp awareness of his surroundings. With a final coordinated effort, Bakugo's team managed to fend off the robots and secure the dummy, successfully completing the course. As the 3 teams gathered at the end of the simulation, they were exhausted but visibly proud of their accomplishments. Aizawa approached, clipboard in hand, and nodded approvingly. Well done, he said, his voice carrying a rare note of satisfaction. You each demonstrated adaptability, resourcefulness, and resilience. These are the qualities that make a hero, quirk or no quirk. All Might stepped forward, his smile broad and encouraging. Today, you proved that true strength comes from within. You pushed past your limits and worked together to accomplish a common goal. Remember this feeling, because it's what will carry you through the toughest battles. Izuku looked around at his classmates, feeling a deep sense of pride. They'd all come so far, learning to support each other and finding strengths they hadn't known they possessed. As his eyes met Bakugo's, he saw a grudging respect there, a silent acknowledgement of the growth they had both achieved. The students dispersed, tired but triumphant, and Izuku felt a renewed resolve. The Quirkless experiment had tested them, revealing their true strength and teaching them that being a hero was about more than power. As they walked back to the dorms, Izuku couldn't help but feel grateful for the experience. They were stronger now, individually and as a team. And he knew that, together, they could face anything that lay ahead. Chapter 10, Bonds Forged in Struggle. The class filed into the common room after another grueling day of training, the weight of exhaustion heavy in the air. Some slumped into chairs or sank to the floor, while others drifted toward the kitchen, grabbing water and snacks as they recovered. There was an unspoken agreement that today had pushed them in ways they hadn't expected, and for many, it was as much a mental challenge as a physical one. Izuku leaned against the wall, watching his classmates with a thoughtful expression. Over the past weeks, he'd seen the subtle changes in each of them, the resilience they'd built, the teamwork they'd struggled to embrace. But beneath it all, he sensed something deeper. Some of his classmates, like Todoroki and Bakugo, were carrying burdens they had barely begun to face. The quiet broke as Kirishima clapped his hands together, his smile as bright as ever, despite his fatigue. "Hey, how about we share what we've learned so far? This experiment, it's hard, but I feel like it's teaching us more about ourselves than I ever expected." Todoroki, sitting cross-legged on the floor, glanced up at him. "You're right," he said softly, almost to himself. "I've realized how much of my identity I tied to my quirk. Without it, I thought I'd feel lost, but I think I'm finally starting to understand who I am, beyond just fire and ice." The room fell silent, Todoroki's words echoing in everyone's mind. For a moment, Izuku saw a glimpse of the weight Todoroki carried, the legacy, the burden of his father's expectations, and the struggle to define himself. Izuku felt a wave of empathy. He thought back to his own journey, his quirkless childhood, the yearning to prove himself, despite feeling powerless. "I get it, Todoroki," he said quietly, meeting his friend's gaze. "Sometimes it feels like we're defined by our abilities. But we're more than that. We're everything we've fought to become." Todoroki nodded, his gaze softening. There was an unspoken understanding between them, one forged through shared challenges and mutual respect. Izuku felt a surge of pride for his friend. Todoroki was growing, embracing parts of himself he'd once kept hidden. Across the room, Bakugo scoffed, breaking the reflective atmosphere. "This is pathetic. You don't need some life lesson to know you're strong. If you're not the best, you're weak. It's as simple as that." Kirishima turned to Bakugo, undeterred by his sharp tone. "Come on, Bakugo. We've all had our moments of struggle. No shame in admitting that this is hard." Bakugo clenched his fists, looking away. "I don't need to struggle. I'm already strong." Izuku noticed the way Bakugo's voice wavered, just slightly. He knew Bakugo's pride was his shield, a way to mask his vulnerabilities, but he couldn't help but wonder if the Quirkless experiment had been pushing him to a breaking point. "Strength isn't just about never struggling, Bakugo," Izuku said gently, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves." For a split second, Bakugo's expression softened, his defenses cracking ever so slightly. He glared at Izuku, his voice low and tight. "Don't pretend you know me, Deku." But Izuku saw the flicker of uncertainty in Bakugo's eyes. He wanted to reach out, to tell him that it was okay to admit fear, that they all carried scars. But he knew that Bakugo wasn't ready to hear it, not yet. Shinso, who had been quietly listening, spoke up, his voice calm. "You know, I used to think that because my quirk wasn't flashy, I didn't have what it takes to be a hero. But this experiment, it's shown me that my strength doesn't have to look like everyone else's. I can still make a difference, even if I don't have explosions or super strength. There was a murmur of agreement, and several classmates nodded. Jaira gave Shinso a supportive pat on the shoulder. Exactly. Heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Besides, Shinso, your quirk is way cool, you've got this mysterious, brooding thing going on. Total hero vibes. Shinsu's face turned slightly pink, and he offered a small smile. Thanks, Jairu. I think I'm starting to believe it, too. Aizawa entered the common room then, observing his students as they shared their thoughts. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. I'm glad to see you're reflecting on this experience. Remember, understanding your own strengths and your limits is essential to becoming a true hero. His gaze softened, a rare show of encouragement. In my years as a pro hero, I've learned that sometimes, your biggest asset is knowing when to ask for help. Don't let pride keep you from growing. Bakugo stiffened, a flicker of anger flashing across his face. He avoided Aizawa's gaze, muttering something under his breath. Izuku felt a pang of sympathy. He knew Bakugo's pride was a double-edged sword, driving him to excel, but also isolating him from those who wanted to help. Aizawa's gaze settled on Bakugo for a moment, unreadable, before he continued. Tomorrow, you'll be taking on a new challenge. This one will require every ounce of teamwork and adaptability you've developed. Rest up and prepare yourselves. The final stretch of the Quirkless experiment is upon you. As Aizawa left, a wave of anticipation filled the room. The students exchanged glances, their resolve hardening. They had come so far, and now, they were ready to face whatever came next. As Izuku made his way to his dorm room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was shifting among them. They were no longer just students in the same class, they were a team, bonded by struggle and strengthened by each other's resilience. And in that quiet moment, as he lay in bed reflecting on the day's conversations, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for each of his classmates. Together, they were becoming heroes in ways he'd never imagined. Chapter 11, The Ultimate Challenge. The next morning, the students of Class 1A gathered at Training Ground Gamma, an expansive field lined with complex structures, dense terrain, and dimly lit tunnels. It was the largest training area they had seen yet, a sprawling maze of obstacles that seemed to stretch endlessly. Aizawa stood at the front, his gaze sharp and unyielding. Today's exercise is a culmination of everything you've learned. This is your ultimate challenge, a simulation designed to mimic a real-life crisis. You'll be divided into 2 teams, but this time, there will be no captains. You'll have to make decisions as a group and navigate challenges without a single leader. A murmur of uncertainty rippled through the group. Izuku felt his pulse quicken. Without a leader to coordinate them, they would have to rely on communication and mutual trust, something that had been difficult for them to maintain consistently. Aizawa continued, you'll have 3 main objectives: rescue civilians, contain potential threats, and secure an exit route. Each objective will require a different skill set and strategy. And remember, there will be obstacles, traps, and distractions along the way. The simulation is timed. If you don't complete it within the limit, you fail. The students shared a mix of determined glances and nervous murmurs. This wasn't just another exercise, it was a test of their growth, their unity, and everything they had learned during the Quirkless experiment. Aizawa split the students into 2 teams, with Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki on separate teams to spread their skills. Izuku took his place with his group, noting that Shinso, Kirishima, and Jairu were among his teammates. He met their gazes, feeling the weight of their shared resolve. Aizawa raised his hand, signaling the start of the simulation. Your time begins now. As they entered the maze-like terrain, the reality of the challenge became apparent. It was dark, the only light coming from scattered dim bulbs, casting eerie shadows across the field. The structures were jagged and tall, creating narrow passages that forced them into single file. Izuku took a deep breath, taking in every detail, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. He turned to his team, his voice steady. "Let's stick together. Communication is key. Jairu, can you use your sound detection to check for anyone up ahead?" Jairu nodded, pressing her earphone jacks against the ground. "I'm picking up footsteps, maybe 50 feet to our right. But they're faint, like they're hiding." "Could be a trap," Shinso murmured, glancing at Izuku. Izuku nodded. "Let's avoid that area for now. Our first objective is to find the civilian dummies. Once we have them, we'll focus on the exit." As they moved forward, Izuku felt the weight of responsibility press down on him. Without a leader, every decision felt heavier, as if he were carrying his entire team's hopes and safety on his shoulders. They reached an open area with towering walls and a narrow bridge spanning a wide pit. Below, Izuku spotted a dummy, one of the civilians they needed to rescue. The only way down was a series of ropes on the wall, but the height made it risky. "Jairu, Kirishima, think you can handle the descent?" Izuku asked, eyeing the ropes. Kirishima grinned, giving a thumbs up. "You bet. Let's save that dummy." With careful steps, they climbed down, Kirishima leading as he tested each rope, before trusting his weight to it. Jairu followed, moving gracefully, and together, they reached the dummy at the bottom. They secured it to a harness and began lifting it carefully, with Shinsu's help from above. They were halfway through when a loud crash echoed through the maze. Izuku's heart pounded, and he glanced toward the noise. Somewhere in the distance, he heard Bakuga's unmistakable voice shouting, followed by Kirishima's muffled laughter. It seemed the other team was dealing with their own set of challenges. "Stay focused," Shinso said, noticing Izuku's momentary distraction. "We can't help them right now." Izuku nodded, regaining his focus as they pulled the dummy back to the top. They secured it and moved forward, feeling a sense of accomplishment. But as they pressed on, the challenges became more complex, each obstacle testing their stamina, coordination, and trust. In one section, they encountered a narrow passage filled with scattered debris, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees to avoid triggering traps. Shinso took the lead, guiding them with steady determination. Izuku was reminded of Shinsu's resilience, his quiet strength that often went unnoticed, yet was as powerful as any quirk. But as they neared the final section of the maze, fatigue began to set in. Jairu stumbled, nearly tripping on a loose wire. Kirishima caught her, his voice soft with concern. "You okay?" She nodded, brushing it off, but Izuku saw the exhaustion in her eyes. He knew they were all reaching their limits, both physically and mentally. "We're almost there," Izuku said, offering a reassuring smile. "Just one more push. We've got this." They moved as a unit, pressing forward with every ounce of strength they had left. At last, they spotted the exit, a metal door at the far end of a corridor lined with obstacles. But just as they approached, a loud clang echoed through the maze, and the walls began to close in, the corridor narrowing with each passing second. They were running out of time. Panic flickered across Jairu's face as the walls loomed closer, and Kirishima's usual grin faded. Izuku felt his own pulse quicken, his mind racing for a solution. "We need to move, now," he shouted, grabbing the dummy and motioning for the others to sprint toward the exit. They dodged obstacles, ducking and weaving as the walls crept closer. Jairu stumbled, her foot catching on a loose wire, but Shinso was there in an instant, helping her up and steadying her as they dashed forward. With a final burst of energy, they reached the door just as the walls closed in behind them. Izuku slammed it shut, breathing heavily as they stood in the safe zone. For a moment, the only sound was their labored breathing, the weight of their achievement settling over them. Aizawa's voice crackled over the speaker. "Well done, Midoriya's team. You completed the simulation with 2 minutes to spare. A cheer went up among the team, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten as they celebrated their victory. Izuku felt a deep sense of pride, not just for himself, but for each of his teammates. They had overcome the odds together, relying on each other in ways that felt profound. As they waited for the other team to complete their challenge, Izuku's gaze drifted to Shinso, who was leaning against the wall, his face reflecting a quiet satisfaction. Izuku approached him, a smile on his face. "You did great, Shinso. I don't think we could have made it without your calmness under pressure." Shinso shrugged, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "I just did what I could. You guys are the real heroes." Izuku shook his head, placing a hand on Shinso's shoulder. "You belong here just as much as any of us. Today proved that." Shinso offered a small smile, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thanks, Midoriya. That means a lot." Bakugo's team returned soon after, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Bakugo was unusually quiet, a flicker of respect in his gaze as he met Izuku's eyes. They didn't speak, but in that glance, Izuku felt an unspoken acknowledgement, a shared understanding that they had both grown. Aizawa gathered them, his expression unreadable as he looked over the class. "Today's exercise was meant to show you what true heroism is: resourcefulness, courage, and the ability to support each other in the face of danger. You all exceeded my expectations. You've come a long way since the start of this experiment." He paused, his voice softening. "Remember, being a hero isn't about power. It's about the strength to persevere, the will to push forward when everything seems impossible. You've proven that today." The class dispersed, each student carrying a sense of fulfillment and pride. Izuku walked back to the dorms beside his friends, their laughter filling the evening air. They had faced their biggest challenge yet, and together, they had emerged stronger. As they settled in for the night, Izuku felt a profound gratitude for the journey they had shared. The Quirkless experiment had tested them in every way, but it had also forged bonds that would last a lifetime. And he knew, deep in his heart, that together, they could face anything the world threw at them. Chapter 12, The Strength We Found. The days following the ultimate challenge felt lighter, though fatigue still clung to each of them. Class 1 as dormitory had become a haven for quiet reflection and shared laughter, the students leaning on one another in ways they hadn't thought possible before the Quirkless experiment began. Late in the evening, Izuku sat in the common room, his journal open on his lap as he penned down his thoughts. He wrote carefully, detailing each lesson he'd learned, both from the training and from his classmates. The words came naturally, a cathartic release of the emotions he'd carried since the experiment started. As he finished the last sentence, he looked up to find Todoroki sitting across from him, his own notebook in hand. Izuku offered him a small smile. "Didn't expect anyone else to be up this late." Todoroki glanced up, his expression as calm as ever, but with a hint of curiosity. "Couldn't sleep. I figured it would be good to write down what I've come to understand." Izuku nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. "It's been intense, hasn't it? I think we've all learned things about ourselves that we weren't ready to see." Todoroki's gaze softened as he thought back to the past few weeks. "For the first time, I feel like I'm not just living in my father's shadow. I used to think my quirk was everything, a legacy I had to uphold or reject. But now I see that my strength doesn't come from that alone. I feel like I'm finding my own path." Izuku's chest tightened with pride for his friend. He could see the layers peeling away, the inner conflict easing, and a quieter, more genuine strength emerging in Todoroki. "You're doing amazing, Todoroki. I think we're all becoming the heroes we were meant to be, in our own ways." A slight smile touched Todoroki's lips, and he reached across the table, offering Izuku a quiet fist bump. Izuku returned it, feeling the unspoken bond growing between them. As the clock ticked past midnight, more of their classmates began trickling into the common room, drawn by an unspoken understanding that tonight was special. This was a night to come together, to share in the journey they had all experienced. Kirishima arrived next, his usual grin softened by fatigue, but his energy still unwavering. He dropped onto the couch beside them, his journal tucked under his arm. "Can't sleep either, huh?" he said, chuckling as he looked at the notebooks. Izuku laughed softly. "Looks like we're all feeling it." Kirishima's expression grew thoughtful, and he leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. "You know, I thought I was strong before this experiment. But now, it's like I see a whole new level of strength. Not just in myself, but in all of you." Jairu joined them, her hair tousled and her voice quiet as she settled into a nearby chair. "I used to think being a hero was all about big, flashy moves," she admitted. "But this experiment has shown me that even quiet strength matters. Sometimes, the smallest steps are the hardest." Shinso entered soon after, drawn by the low murmurs of conversation. He took a seat beside Jairu, his posture relaxed, but his expression introspective. "For a long time I didn't believe I belonged here," he said, his voice steady but filled with a vulnerability that made everyone pause. "But seeing all of you struggle, seeing you push past your limits, it made me realize that strength isn't about having a powerful quirk. It's about fighting through, even when you're not sure if you can." Jairu nudged him, a small smile on her lips. "You more than belong, Shinso. You've shown all of us what real courage looks like." Shinso looked down, a faint blush coloring his cheeks, but he smiled, gratitude shining in his eyes. Bakugo arrived last, his usual intense expression softened by the lateness of the hour. He glanced around the room, taking in the quiet gathering, and scoffed, though there was a hint of something softer in his gaze. "Didn't know it was a pity party," he muttered, but he settled into an empty chair, the tension in his posture slowly easing. The group fell into a comfortable silence, each person lost in their own thoughts as they reflected on the journey they had shared. The experiment had pushed them, challenged them, and tested the very fabric of who they were. But now, sitting together in the dim light, they could feel the strength of the bonds they had forged. At last, Izuku spoke, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "You know, when I started this, I was terrified. I thought losing our quirks would make us weaker. But now, I think it's made us stronger. Not just as individuals, but as a team." Todoroki nodded, his gaze unwavering. "We've each learned something about ourselves, something we might never have seen if we hadn't faced this challenge." Kirishima leaned forward, his usual exuberance tempered by sincerity. "I've learned that real strength isn't just about muscle or power. It's about the courage to keep going, even when everything feels impossible." Bakugo's expression remained guarded, but he crossed his arms, nodding subtly. "Strength isn't about not struggling. It's about fighting through, no matter what. And if anyone tries to hold me back, I'll blow past them with or without my quirk." Shinso chuckled, meeting Bakugo's eyes with a hint of admiration. "For what it's worth, Bakugo, I think we all see that strength in you. Maybe you're right, it's not about being the best. It's about giving everything you have, even when it's hard." A rare silence settled over the group, each person absorbing the words shared. They had each entered this experiment with different fears, goals, and expectations, but now, as they looked at one another, they realized they had found a strength far beyond quirks or powers. They had found family. All Might entered the common room quietly, having overheard the end of their conversation. He stood by the door, his towering figure softened by a gentle smile. "I'm proud of all of you," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "You've learned lessons that go beyond hero training. These are the lessons that will shape you as people, as heroes." Aizawa joined him, nodding in agreement. This experiment wasn't just about pushing your physical limits. It was about understanding that heroism is built on resilience, on supporting each other, and on finding strength when you have nothing left to give. Izuku felt his chest tighten, gratitude swelling within him as he looked at his teachers, his friends, his classmates. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for believing in us." Aizawa offered a small nod, a rare smile touching his lips. "You've all earned it. And remember, your journey is just beginning. Take what you've learned here and carry it forward, not just in battle, but in life." They lingered in the common room for a while longer, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. The night wore on, but none of them wanted to leave. This was a moment they would carry with them, a memory of the night they came together, not as mere students, but as a united team. As dawn approached, they finally dispersed, each returning to their rooms with hearts full and spirits renewed. Izuku lay awake in bed, replaying the night's conversations in his mind, a feeling of peace settling over him. They had come so far, grown so much, and he knew, without a doubt, that together, they could face any challenge. And as he drifted to sleep, he knew that he wasn't just becoming a hero. He was becoming part of something greater, something that would carry him forward through every trial, every victory, and every battle yet to come. Chapter 13, The Final Day. The morning sun cast a warm glow over UA High, spilling through the training grounds as Class 1A gathered for the last day of the Quirkless Experiment. A soft breeze rustled the trees, and the air felt charged with a bittersweet energy. Today marked the end of a journey that had pushed them, challenged them, and changed them. Izuku took a deep breath, standing with his classmates as they waited for Aizawa and All Might to arrive. He glanced around, noting the expressions on each of their faces. Some looked excited, others contemplative, and a few, like Shinso, wore expressions of quiet pride. The experiment had become more than just training, it had become a part of them. Izuku felt a surge of emotion as he remembered the countless challenges they'd faced, the moments of frustration and triumph, the silent bonds that had formed between them. This wasn't just a group of students, this was a family. Aizawa approached, his gaze sweeping over them with his usual calm, though a hint of pride shone in his eyes. Beside him, All Might stood tall, his face reflecting a mix of pride and nostalgia. "Today," Aizawa began, his voice steady, "marks the end of the Quirkless Experiment. I've seen each of you grow in ways I couldn't have anticipated. You've learned to rely on yourselves, to push past your limits, and to find strength in one another." He paused, letting his words settle. "To complete this experiment, we'll be doing one last exercise. A simple relay, nothing elaborate, no complex objectives. Just a race, with each of you running a section of the course. The goal is to reach the finish line together." The students exchanged puzzled glances, surprised by the simplicity of the challenge. After weeks of intense simulations, a relay felt almost anticlimactic. But Izuku saw the knowing look in Aizawa's eyes, and sensed that there was more to this exercise than met the eye. All Might stepped forward, his smile broad and encouraging. "This relay is a chance for you to reflect on the journey you've taken. Each section represents a piece of what you've learned: endurance, agility, strategy, and, most importantly, teamwork." He gestured to the starting line, where a baton lay waiting. "Pass the baton carefully. Trust each other, rely on each other. This race isn't about winning, it's about finishing together." Izuku felt a surge of determination. He glanced at his classmates, meeting their gazes, and saw the same resolve mirrored in their eyes. This was their final moment to prove not only to their teachers, but to themselves, just how far they'd come. Aizawa divided the class into pairs, for each section. Izuku was paired with Todoroki, a combination that filled him with both excitement and a sense of peace. They had faced so much together, growing from rivals into friends, and he knew this final challenge would bring them even closer. The first section began with Bakugo and Kirishima. Bakugo's eyes gleamed with his usual fierce intensity as he took the baton, gripping it tightly. Kirishima grinned beside him, radiating unwavering support. The whistle blew, and Bakugo shot forward, his steps powerful and controlled. Kirishima matched his pace, both of them moving in perfect sync. They navigated the obstacles effortlessly, passing the baton to Jairu and Yaoyorozu, who took over with equal determination. One by one, each pair ran their section of the course. With every handoff, the baton became a symbol of their unity, of the strength they'd built together. Izuku watched each handoff, feeling a swell of pride for his friends. He could see the growth in each of them, the confidence they now carried that went beyond their quirks. At last, it was Izuku and Todoroki's turn. Yaoyorozu passed them the baton, her expression a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Izuku took it, feeling its weight, feeling the responsibility that it represented. "Let's do this, Todoroki," he said, meeting his friend's gaze. Todoroki nodded, his eyes steady. Together. They set off, moving in perfect harmony. The final stretch was filled with challenging obstacles, a tall wall to climb, narrow beams to cross, and a series of ropes to navigate. But they worked as a unit, supporting each other through every step. As they neared the end, Izuku felt a flood of emotions rise within him. This was the last challenge, the last test of the experiment that had changed his life. He looked at Todoroki, who wore a small, almost unnoticeable smile, a look of quiet triumph in his eyes. They reached the finish line together, holding the baton between them. The rest of the class gathered around, cheering, laughing, their faces bright with joy and pride. Aizawa approached, his expression uncharacteristically warm. "Well done, Class 1A. This experiment was meant to teach you more than just skills, it was meant to teach you who you are and who you can become. And you've also passed my expectations." All Might joined them, his voice filled with pride. "You've proven today that heroes aren't defined by their quirks. They're defined by their hearts, their resilience, and their ability to stand strong together." Izuku felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, his heart swelling with gratitude for his teachers, his friends, and the journey they had shared. He looked around at each of his classmates, feeling a profound sense of connection that went beyond words. One by one, they embraced, sharing quiet words of encouragement and congratulations. Bakugo, ever the reluctant one, muttered a gruff, "Good job, idiots," but there was a faint smile tugging at his lips. Todoroki placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his voice soft. "Thank you, Midoriya. For everything. I don't think I could have grown this much without you." Izuku's heart ached with pride as he gripped Todoroki's shoulder in return. "We've all helped each other. I'm grateful for every moment of this." As the class gathered for a final group photo, Aizawa held up the camera, capturing the smiles, the laughter, the bonds that had formed. It was a memory they would carry with them, a testament to the strength they had found within themselves and each other. That night, as Izuku lay in bed, he reflected on everything he had learned. The experiment had shown him that heroism wasn't just about power or strength, it was about standing by those you cared about fighting for something greater than yourself. With that thought, he drifted into a peaceful sleep, knowing that the future was bright. They were more than classmates, they were a family, bound by struggle, by triumph, and by the strength they had found together. Chapter 14, Reflections and New Beginnings. The atmosphere in Class 1A was calmer than it had been in weeks. With the Quirkless experiment officially over, a strange quiet had settled over the dorms. Though they were relieved to finally rest, each student felt the lingering impact of the training, a weight that was equal parts pride and nostalgia. The following day, Aizawa called for a final gathering in the common room. The class filtered in, exchanging knowing glances and soft smiles, their expressions reflecting the unspoken understanding they now shared. Izuku noticed Bakugo standing by the window, his face uncharacteristically contemplative, while Shinso leaned back in his chair, quietly observing the room. Aizawa waited until everyone was seated before he spoke. "The Quirkless experiment may be over, but the lessons you've learned will stay with you. Today, I want each of you to take a moment to reflect on what you've gained, what you've struggled with, and what you plan to take forward from this experience." The students exchanged glances, each of them understanding the depth of the question. One by one, they began to speak, their voices soft yet filled with conviction. Todoroki went first, his voice steady. I've learned that my strength isn't just my quirk. For a long time, I felt trapped by it, like it was a part of me that I couldn't escape. But now, I know that I can be strong on my own. And that strength isn't something my father gave me, it's something I built. Izuku watched Todoroki with pride, feeling a warmth in his chest at his friend's words. Todoroki had come so far, shedding the weight of his father's expectations and finding his own identity. It was a journey that Izuku knew had been painful, but also freeing. Next, Jiru spoke, her tone more reflective. I used to think that my quirk wasn't enough to make me a real hero. But this experiment, it's shown me that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. I can make a difference, even if it's in smaller ways. Sometimes, the quiet strength matters just as much as the flashy moves. Kirishima gave her a supportive nudge, his grin bright. Right on, Jiru. I've realized the same thing. Strength isn't just about being tough, it's about staying true to who you are, even when things get rough. And I know I can do that because of you guys. You've all shown me what real heroism looks like. One by one, the others shared their reflections. Yaoyorozu spoke about learning to trust herself and her decisions, Kaminari admitted that he'd grown more focused, and Shinso expressed his gratitude for the support he'd found in the class, a place he'd finally begun to feel was truly his own. Finally, it was Izuku's turn. He hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts. This experiment, it reminded me of what it felt like to be quirkless. But it also showed me that being a hero isn't about having a powerful ability. It's about having the courage to keep going, even when it's hard. And it's about the people beside you, the ones who lift you up. He looked around the room, his gaze meeting each of his friends. I'm grateful for all of you. You've shown me that together, we're stronger than we ever could be alone. And I know we'll carry that strength forward, no matter what we face. The room fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of their shared words settling around them. For a moment, it felt as if the air itself was filled with their hopes, their fears, and the bonds they had forged through countless trials. All Might entered then, his smile gentle. You've all come so far, and I couldn't be prouder. The hero world is filled with challenges, but the strength you've found, both in yourselves and in each other, will be your greatest weapon. Remember that, no matter where life takes you. Aizawa nodded, his expression softer than usual. And don't forget, you still have a long way to go. The journey doesn't end here. Keep pushing yourselves, keep growing, and never lose sight of who you are. The students spent the rest of the afternoon sharing stories, laughing, and reminiscing about the most memorable moments of the experiment. They talked about the toughest exercises, the funniest missteps, and the small victories that had meant the world to them. As the hours passed, the atmosphere became a mix of joy and nostalgia, each of them recognizing how deeply they had changed. When evening fell, they decided to celebrate with a homemade meal. The kitchen was a chaotic mess of ingredients, clattering pans, and laughter as everyone contributed something. Todoroki carefully sliced vegetables, Kirishima and Bakugu argued over the seasoning, and Uraraka laughed as Kaminari accidentally spilled flour everywhere. The camaraderie was palpable, a reminder of just how much they had come to care for each other. As they finally sat down to eat, sharing plates of hastily made pasta and oddly shaped bread rolls, Izuku felt a wave of contentment wash over him. This was family. Not in the traditional sense, but in a way that was even more profound, a family bound by choice, by loyalty, and by the shared dreams that connected them. After dinner, they gathered in the common room once more, this time with blankets and pillows strewn across the floor as they settled in for a late-night movie. The film was a classic superhero movie, something light and nostalgic, but none of them paid much attention. Instead, they whispered among themselves, sharing stories, jokes, and the occasional quiet conversation. Izuku felt Todoroki settle beside him, both of them watching the screen as they shared a comfortable silence. "Thank you, Midoriya," Todoroki said softly, his voice almost lost in the quiet hum of the movie. "For helping me find my own path." Izuku looked at him, a warmth spreading in his chest. "You did that yourself, Todoroki. But I'm glad. I'm glad I could be there." Beside them, Bakugo shifted, catching their conversation out of the corner of his eye. He huffed, folding his arms as he muttered, "You idiots act like this is the end. We've still got a long way to go. Don't go getting all sentimental." Kirishima laughed, nudging Bakugo with his elbow. "Come on, Bakugo. Just admit you're going to miss all this training with us." Bakugo grumbled, but a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Whatever. Don't slow me down, and maybe I'll consider it." The room filled with laughter, and for the rest of the night, they basked in the warmth of their newfound strength and unity. By the time they all drifted off to sleep, sprawled across couches and floors in a tangle of blankets and pillows, the bonds they had forged felt unbreakable. As dawn broke, casting a soft light over the sleeping students, Izuku stirred, his heart filled with a sense of purpose. This experiment had shown him that being a hero was more than just strength or courage, it was about the people who stood beside you, the ones who made you stronger by being there. And as he looked around at his classmates, his friends, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because they weren't just heroes in training, they were a team, a family, and that was a strength that could never be taken from them. Chapter 15, Facing the Future Together. The final morning of the Quirkless experiment dawned bright and clear, casting a soft glow over UA High. The early light filtered through the windows of Class 1's dormitory, illuminating the quiet faces of the students as they prepared to face the next phase of their journey. Izuku lay awake in his bed, listening to the sounds of his classmates stirring in the hallways. For the first time in weeks, they would train with their quirks again. He felt a mixture of excitement and reluctance, a pull between the power he'd fought so hard to wield and the strength he had found within himself without it. As he dressed, Izuku's mind drifted back to the many moments that had defined the experiment. Each obstacle, every test had forced him to dig deep, to confront parts of himself he'd rarely acknowledged. And as he glanced in the mirror, he realized that he was looking at someone different, someone stronger, more confident, and more at peace with who he was. In the common room, the class gathered slowly, a sense of quiet anticipation hanging over them. Each student wore an expression of mixed emotions, a testament to the profound changes they had experienced. Izuku noticed Todoroki standing by the window, gazing out with a look of calm resolve. Kirishima and Bakugo stood nearby, Kirishima's usual grin softened by a new maturity, while Bakugo's intense gaze held a glimmer of quiet pride. Aizawa entered, his presence commanding attention even in the subdued atmosphere. He looked at his students, his gaze lingering on each one with a silent acknowledgement of their journey. "Today, we return to training with your quirks," he began, his voice steady. "But I want each of you to remember what you've learned. Your quirk is a tool, it does not define you. The strength you carry within yourselves is your true power." The words resonated in the stillness, each student absorbing the truth of Aizawa's message. Izuku glanced at Todoroki, who nodded slightly, a flicker of understanding passing between them. They had come to realize that their identities were not bound by their abilities, that they were more than the quirks they wielded. Aizawa paused, his tone softening. "I'm proud of you. You've shown growth, resilience, and strength. You've learned to rely on each other, and you've discovered a depth of courage that goes beyond any quirk. Take that with you as you move forward." All Might joined them, his expression filled with pride and warmth. "This journey has been challenging, but you've all proven that you're heroes, not just in power, but in spirit. Remember that, and let it guide you through every battle, every trial that lies ahead." The class stood in silence, the gravity of the moment sinking in. They had faced their fears, their weaknesses, and emerged stronger, bound by the understanding that true heroism went beyond mere abilities. It was about heart, about the courage to keep going even when all seemed lost. Izuku took a deep breath, feeling a swell of gratitude for his teachers, his friends, his family in this journey. He stepped forward, his voice steady as he spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Aizawa, All Might. For believing in us, for pushing us to be more than we thought we could be." Aizawa gave a small nod, a rare, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "You've earned it, Midoriya. Each of you has earned it." The students moved toward the training grounds in a quiet procession, their minds heavy with the weight of the journey they had shared. When they reached the expansive field, they lined up, each one ready to face the future with a renewed sense of purpose. One by one, they activated their quirks, testing their powers with careful, controlled movements. Izuku felt the familiar surge of energy as one for all thrummed to life, the strength flowing through him like an old friend. But this time it was different. He didn't feel the same rush of dependency, instead, he felt grounded, as if his quirk was an extension of the strength he had discovered within himself. Nearby, Todoroki summoned a small flame, his gaze steady as he controlled its flickering light. He glanced at Izuku, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. "It feels different now. Like it's mine, and not just something I inherited." Izuku nodded, his heart swelling with pride for his friend. "You've made it your own. And you've proven that you're strong, even without it." Todoroki offered a rare, genuine smile. "So have you, Midoriya. We all have." As they continued their exercises, Izuku noticed Bakugo off to the side, staring down at his hands. For a moment, the proud and brash boy seemed almost vulnerable, his expression softened by something close to introspection. Izuku approached him, sensing that this was a rare moment of openness. "Bakugo," Izuku said gently, "you've come a long way too. This experiment. I think it's shown all of us that we're more than our quirks." Bakugo looked up, his eyes fierce, but tinged with something deeper. "I don't need you to tell me that, Deku. I know who I am. But, maybe this whole thing wasn't a waste of time after all." Izuku chuckled, knowing that this was as close as Bakugo would come to expressing gratitude. "I think it's helped all of us see ourselves more clearly." Bakugo smirked, folding his arms. "Yeah, well, don't get soft on me, nerd. We're not done yet." As the training session continued, the students moved through their exercises with a renewed sense of control, each one wielding their quirks with precision and purpose. They were no longer just students, they were young heroes, united by the strength they had found in themselves and each other. At the end of the day, as they gathered one last time on the training grounds, Aizawa and All Might approached, their expressions filled with pride and encouragement. "You've completed the Quirkless experiment," Aizawa said, his voice filled with finality. "But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Keep pushing yourselves, keep growing, and never forget the strength you've discovered." All Might added, his voice steady, "The world needs heroes who understand that true power comes from within. You've proven that you are those heroes. Stand tall, and face the future with the courage and heart that you've shown here." The class stood together, a united front, their hearts filled with determination and pride. Izuku looked around at his friends, feeling a sense of completeness he hadn't known was possible. They were a family, a team, and he knew that, no matter what challenges awaited them, they would face them together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the training grounds, the students of Class 1A walked back to their dorms, side by side, ready to embrace the future and all it held. Chapter 16, Resolutions and Promises. The evening sky was a deep, rich indigo, dotted with stars as Class 1A gathered on the rooftop of their dormitory. The air was filled with quiet anticipation, and each student was wrapped in the warmth of shared memories and new beginnings. They had chosen this spot for their final farewell to the Quirkless experiment, a place where they could be alone together, surrounded by the beauty of the night sky. Izuku stood by the edge of the rooftop, gazing out at the shimmering city lights in the distance. His heart felt full, a mixture of gratitude, pride, and a gentle ache that marked the end of this chapter in their lives. They were returning to normal training, yes, but they would never be the same. The experiment had forged them into something stronger, something closer. The class had gathered in a circle, each of them holding a candle, the soft light illuminating their faces. Yaoyorozu had suggested this small ceremony, and everyone had agreed. It felt right to mark the end of the experiment with something meaningful, something that allowed each of them to express the ways they'd grown. Kirishima, ever the enthusiastic spirit, took a step forward, holding his candle up. "All right, Class 1A. Tonight, let's each make a promise. Something to remind ourselves of everything we've learned. Something we'll hold on to as we move forward." Everyone murmured their agreement, and Kirishima flashed a grin before clearing his throat. "I'll go first," he said, his voice filled with warmth and resolve. "I promise to never give up on myself or any of you. Strength is something we build together, and I'm going to keep pushing forward, for all of us." Izuku smiled, feeling a rush of pride. Kirishima's words resonated deeply, capturing the spirit of the journey they had shared. One by one, the students stepped forward, each making their own promise. Jairu promised to trust in her own strength and to support her friends in every way she could, even when it meant stepping out of her comfort zone. Shinso pledged to never doubt his place among them again, vowing to keep growing and fighting to prove he belonged. When it was Todoroki's turn, he took a breath, his candle casting a gentle glow over his thoughtful expression. "I promise to continue defining my own path," he said softly, his voice steady. "To embrace every part of myself, not because of my father, but because it's who I am." A murmur of encouragement rippled through the group, and Todoroki gave a small nod, the weight of his words reflected in his eyes. Finally, it was Izuku's turn. He took a step forward, the cool night air brushing against his skin, and held his candle a little higher, his voice filled with conviction. "I promise to keep fighting with everything I have, to use the strength I've found in all of you. I'll become the hero I've always dreamed of, not because of my quirk, but because of my heart." As he spoke, Izuku felt the enormity of his promise settle over him, a vow that would guide him in every step he took from this moment forward. He looked around at his friends, his family, feeling a surge of gratitude for each one of them. After everyone had shared their promises, they stood in a circle, each person holding their candle high, the soft flames dancing in the night air. For a long moment, they simply stood together, letting the silence speak for them. It was a silence filled with understanding, with love, and with the unbreakable bonds they had forged. Bakugo, standing off to the side, broke the silence with a scoff, though his voice held none of its usual harshness. "Enough of the sentimental crap. We all know we're strong, so let's make sure we prove it." Kirishima grinned, giving him a nudge. "You got it, Bakugo. Together, we're unstoppable." The class burst into quiet laughter, the tension easing as they fell back into the comfortable camaraderie they had built over these long weeks. They stayed on the rooftop for hours, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. The stars shone brightly above them, casting a gentle glow over the group, as if blessing the promises they had made. As midnight approached, Aizawa and All Might appeared, having been quietly observing from a distance. All Might stepped forward, his voice filled with warmth. "I've watched each of you grow, and I couldn't be prouder. You've shown courage, heart, and strength that goes beyond anything I could have imagined. You've proven yourselves, not just as heroes in training, but as true heroes." Aizawa nodded, his gaze steady. "Remember, the journey continues. Keep each other strong, and never lose sight of the strength you've found in each other. You are Class 1A, and you have earned the right to stand tall together." Izuku felt a swell of pride as he looked around at his classmates, his friends, his family. The journey they had shared would stay with them forever, guiding them in every step they took. They were more than heroes, they were a team, bound by promises, by strength, and by a love that could not be broken. As they descended from the rooftop, Izuku walked beside Todoroki, his heart light. "Thank you, Todoroki. For being there. For everything." Todoroki gave him a small smile. "We've all helped each other, Midoriya. That's what makes us strong." They returned to their dorms, each carrying a piece of the night with them, the promises they had made and the strength they had discovered. And as they drifted off to sleep, they knew, with an unshakable certainty, that they would face the future together, no matter what lay ahead. Because they weren't just students. They were heroes. And this was only the beginning. Chapter 17, The Dawn of a New Era. The following days at UA High felt alive with an electric energy. With the Quirkless experiment behind them, the students of Class 1A dove back into their regular training routines, but something was profoundly different. Their movements carried a new precision, their confidence was undeniable, and their teamwork was sharper, a reflection of the bond they had forged. Izuku could feel the difference within himself. When he summoned One for All, it no longer felt like a force he needed to wrestle with or control. Instead, it moved through him with ease, an extension of the strength he'd come to know during the experiment. He approached each exercise with a sense of balance, no longer worried about measuring up or pushing himself to extremes to prove his worth. On one particular morning, the class gathered at the training field for a combat exercise, each student eager to showcase the new skills they had honed during their quirkless training. Aizawa observed from the sidelines, his sharp eyes assessing each student's movements. "Today, we'll be focusing on pairing your quirks with the techniques you developed during the experiment," Aizawa announced, his voice carrying over the field. "Use what you've learned about your own strength, strategy, and endurance. You're no longer just quirk users, you're heroes with purpose." Izuku paired up with Shinso for the exercise, and as they faced off, he couldn't help but smile. Shinso's growth had been one of the most inspiring transformations he had witnessed. The quiet, uncertain student was now someone who stood with confidence and purpose. "Ready to test yourself, Midoriya?" Shinso asked, his eyes sharp with determination. Izuku grinned, settling into a fighting stance. "Bring it on, Shinso. Let's see what we've got." They moved in sync, their combat flowing like a dance. Shinso used his newly developed agility and quick reflexes to avoid Izuku's attacks, countering with precise movements that kept Izuku on his toes. It was no longer about overpowering each other but testing the depth of their skills, pushing themselves to see just how far they could go. Nearby, Todoroki was sparring with Bakugo, their fight a powerful clash of ice, fire, and explosions. Yet there was a noticeable difference in their approach. Where once Bakugo's moves would have been driven by raw aggression, now there was a calculated precision in each strike. Todoroki matched him with a steady calm, his control over his flames and ice more refined than ever. Kirishima and Jairu, paired together, moved with a unity that showed their trust in each other's abilities. Jairu used her sound waves to distract and disorient, while Kirishima acted as a shield, protecting her from close-range attacks. Their movements were fluid, reflecting the deep respect they had built during the experiment. As each pair continued their exercise, Aizawa stepped forward, addressing the class as they paused to catch their breath. "This is what true heroism looks like. Each of you has taken what you learned and transformed it into strength, not just for yourselves, but for each other. This is what will set you apart as heroes." All Might, who had been watching quietly from the sidelines, approached with a warm smile. "You've become more than just students. You've become a force of unity, a team that moves with purpose. Hold on to that bond, because it will be your greatest strength in the battles to come." The class fell into a reflective silence, their faces filled with pride and determination. They had grown so much, not just as individuals, but as a team. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they would always have each other to rely on. As the students returned to the dorms that evening, Izuku found himself standing outside with Todoroki, gazing at the stars as they lingered in the cool night air. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Izuku said softly, his voice filled with wonder. I can barely recognize the person I was when we started this experiment. Todoroki nodded, a small smile touching his lips. It's been a journey, for all of us. But I think, this is just the beginning. We're only going to keep growing. Izuku turned to him, a sense of gratitude swelling in his chest. Thank you, Todoroki. For everything. I wouldn't be here without all of you. Todoroki met his gaze, his expression steady and warm. None of us would. That's the strength we found together. The following weeks passed in a blur of training, challenges, and laughter. The class continued to grow, facing new exercises and obstacles with a resilience that seemed unbreakable. And each time they stumbled, each time they fell, they were there to lift each other back up, the strength of their unity carrying them forward. One afternoon, Aizawa gathered the class for a surprise announcement. They stood in a loose circle, their curiosity piqued as he addressed them. I wanted to let you know, he began, his voice calm, that UA will be adding a new module to the curriculum next year, a quirkless training component. The success of this experiment has shown us that there is value in understanding our own limits, in relying on more than just our quirks. The class exchanged looks of surprise and excitement, their faces lighting up with pride. They had not only grown themselves but had paved the way for future students to experience the same journey, to find the strength they had discovered in themselves. Izuku felt a surge of pride, knowing that their efforts would inspire others, that their journey would leave a lasting impact on UA and the hero world. They had become more than students, they had become role models, leaders in their own right. As the class dispersed, Izuku found himself walking back to the dorms with Bakugo, an unexpected companion in this quiet moment. Bakugo walked with his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful, almost contemplative. Can you believe it? Izuku said, glancing at him with a small smile. We're actually making a difference. Bakugo scoffed, but there was no venom in his tone. Don't go getting all sentimental, Deku. Just means we did our job right. Izuku chuckled, sensing the pride that Bakugo kept hidden beneath his tough exterior. Yeah. We did. They walked in silence for a few moments before Bakugo spoke, his voice softer than usual. We're not done, you know. This is just the start. Izuku nodded, his heart swelling with resolve. I know. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The two of them shared a brief glance, an unspoken promise passing between them. They had come a long way, and though the journey was far from over, they were ready for whatever lay ahead. That night, as the students of Class 1A settled into the quiet comfort of their dorms, each one drifted off to sleep with a sense of peace and purpose. They were no longer just students, they were a team, a family, bound by the journey they had shared and the strength they had found together. And as the first rays of dawn broke over UA High, they knew, with unshakable certainty, that they were ready to face the future, not as individuals, but as heroes, united in their resolve and stronger than ever. Chapter 18, Personal Reflections. The sun was beginning to set over UA High, casting a warm glow across the campus as Class 1A went about their evening routines. For the first time in weeks, they had the evening free, a chance to breathe, to let their minds wander, and to reflect on the journey they had completed together. Izuku sat at his desk, his journal open in front of him as he began to write. But the words didn't come easily, there was too much to say, too many feelings swirling inside him. He thought back to the first day of the Quirkless experiment, when he'd been filled with doubt, wondering if he'd ever measure up to his classmates. Now, though, he felt a quiet confidence, a strength that didn't rely on his quirk but came from the resilience he'd found within himself. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts, and he looked up to see Todoroki standing in the doorway, his expression thoughtful. Mind if I join you? Todoroki asked, holding his own notebook. Izuku smiled and motioned for him to come in. Todoroki settled into the chair beside him, glancing at the journal on Izuku's desk. Writing about the experiment? Todoroki asked, his voice soft but filled with interest. Trying to, Izuku replied with a chuckle. There's just so much. I don't know where to begin. Todoroki nodded, his gaze distant. It's hard to put it into words. This journey, it feels like it's changed everything, hasn't it? Izuku glanced at his friend, seeing the depth of emotion in his eyes. Yeah, it really has. I feel stronger. Not just because of my quirk, but because of everything we've learned together. Todoroki's gaze softened. I've never felt this comfortable with my own strength before. The experiment made me realize that I don't have to be my father's legacy. I can be someone else. Someone I choose. They fell into a companionable silence, both of them reflecting on the transformation they had undergone. The words didn't need to be spoken, they understood each other, sharing a bond that went beyond words. Down the hall, Jairu sat in her room, strumming her guitar absently as she reflected on her own journey. She'd always felt a quiet strength within herself, but the experiment had forced her to confront her insecurities, the fear that her quieter approach to heroism might not be enough. But now, she understood that her strength wasn't defined by volume or flashiness. It was in her resilience, her dedication, and her quiet courage. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace as she played a gentle melody, letting the music fill the room. The experiment had taught her to trust her instincts, to believe that her unique approach was just as powerful as anyone else's. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts, and she opened it to find Yaoyorozu standing there, a hesitant smile on her face. Hey, Jairu. I just wanted to thank you, Yaoyorozu said, her voice filled with sincerity. You helped me realize that sometimes, the quietest strengths are the most profound. Watching you, it reminded me that I don't have to prove myself with every decision. I can trust myself, and that's enough. Jairu's cheeks flushed, and she gave a small nod, feeling a warmth in her chest. Thank you, Yaoyorozu. I think we've all learned a lot from each other. They shared a quiet moment, each finding comfort in the understanding they'd built, a connection strengthened by shared experiences and mutual respect. Elsewhere, Bakuga sat alone in the training room, staring at his hands as he clenched and unclenched them. The experiment had been a humbling experience, forcing him to rely on more than his explosions. It had reminded him of what he had feared all along, that power alone wasn't enough to define him. But instead of feeling defeated, he felt a fierce determination. He wouldn't just be the strongest hero, he would be a hero who stood above the rest not just because of his power, but because of his resilience, his adaptability. The experiment had shown him that even when stripped of his quirk, he was still Bakuga Katsuki. And that was enough. Kirishima walked in, a grin on his face as he approached his friend. Hey, Bakugo. Training even when we don't have to? You're unstoppable, man. Bakugo scoffed, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. Don't get soft on me, Kirishima. Just making sure I'm still the best. Kirishima laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. You don't need to prove that, Bakugo. We all know how strong you are. But I think you've shown us a lot more than that. You've shown us that strength isn't just about power. It's about heart. Bakugo looked away, but his expression softened, and he gave a slight nod. Yeah. Just keep up, will ya? Shinso sat on the rooftop, gazing at the stars as he processed his own growth. The experiment had been more than just training, it had been a journey of self-acceptance. For so long, he had questioned his worth, wondering if he belonged in Class 1A, if he could ever measure up to the others. But the quirkless training had shown him that his value went beyond his brainwashing quirk. He was resourceful, determined, and, most importantly, a part of something bigger than himself. A soft voice broke the silence, and he turned to see Uraraka sitting down beside him, her expression warm. Mind if I join you? He shook his head, and she settled in, gazing up at the stars. You know, she began, her voice thoughtful, I used to think that being a hero was just about saving people. But the experiment made me realize that sometimes, it's about saving yourself, too. Finding your own strength. Shinso nodded, feeling a deep resonance with her words. I think we all found something in ourselves that we didn't know was there. Uraraka smiled, reaching over to give his hand a gentle squeeze. You belong here, Shinso. We all see it, and I hope you do too. Shinsu's heart swelled with gratitude, and he nodded, a quiet determination filling his gaze. Yeah. I think I finally believe it. The students of Class 1A spent the evening in their own quiet reflections, each one processing the journey they had taken. For some, it was about newfound confidence, for others, it was about redefining their own paths. But for all of them, the Quirkless experiment had left an indelible mark, a reminder of the strength they carried within. As the night deepened, they gathered once more in the common room, drawn together by an unspoken need to be with each other. They didn't speak much, but there was a sense of unity in the silence, a comfort in the presence of friends who understood the journey they had shared. Finally, Izuku broke the silence, his voice filled with emotion. We've all grown so much. And I think we're ready to face whatever comes next, together. Todoroki nodded, his gaze steady. We found a strength that goes beyond power. We're more than just students. We're a team. Kirishima grinned, holding out his fist. Yeah, and nothing's gonna stand in our way. Plus ultra, right? One by one, they joined in, each placing a hand in the center, a symbol of the unity and strength they had built. They looked around at each other, their expressions filled with pride, determination, and a sense of belonging that went beyond words. As they parted ways and returned to their rooms, each student carried a piece of the evening with them, a memory of the promises they had made, the strength they had found, and the team they had become. And as they drifted off to sleep, they knew, deep in their hearts, that this was only the beginning. Together, they were unstoppable. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, heroes bound by the strength they had found in each other. Chapter 19, Training Day Reunion. The energy in the air was palpable as Class 1A gathered on the training grounds. It was an unusually warm day, with the sun casting a golden glow over the field, illuminating the eager faces of the students. They were dressed in their training uniforms, their movements filled with excitement and anticipation. Today was a special day. Aizawa had hinted that it would be a training day reunion, where they'd revisit some of the exercises from the Quirkless experiment. But this time, they'd be using their quirks, testing how their powers now paired with their new strengths. Izuku could feel the thrill bubbling up inside him. It felt like a full-circle moment, a chance to see how far he had come and to celebrate the journey he had shared with his friends. As he looked around, he could see the same sense of pride and excitement mirrored in his classmates' faces. Todoroki, standing beside him, gave a slight nod, his expression calm yet filled with quiet determination. Aizawa approached, clipboard in hand, and scanned the group with his usual intense gaze. But today, there was a hint of something softer in his expression, a quiet pride that didn't go unnoticed. You'll be working in pairs today, Aizawa announced, his voice steady. This will be a series of team-based challenges, each designed to test how well you've integrated the skills you learned during the Quirkless experiment with your quirks. Use what you've gained, and remember, this is about growth, not competition. All Might stepped forward, his voice filled with encouragement. You've all come so far, and today is about celebrating that progress. Show us how you've transformed your strengths and let them shine. The class cheered, the atmosphere buzzing with excitement as they prepared for the exercises. Aizawa called out the pairs, and Izuku found himself partnered with Uraraka, who grinned at him, her eyes bright with anticipation. Let's give it our all, Deku, she said, her enthusiasm contagious. Izuku nodded, feeling a surge of confidence. Absolutely. Let's show them what we've got. Their first challenge was a timed obstacle course that required them to navigate various physical obstacles, many of which they had encountered during the experiment. But this time, they had the advantage of their quirks, and Izuku could feel the difference as he activated one for all, the power coursing through him with a newfound sense of control. As they began, Izuku took the lead, leaping over a series of hurdles with ease, his movements fluid and precise. Uraraka followed closely, using her zero gravity to glide over the obstacles with a graceful efficiency. They moved in sync, their teamwork seamless, each step a testament to the trust they had built. When they reached a tall wall, Uraraka tapped Izuku on the shoulder. "I can float you up if you boost me over first," she suggested, her voice steady with confidence. Izuku grinned, lifting her so she could activate her quirk. She floated to the top with ease, then turned and reached down, using her gravity manipulation to lighten Izuku's weight as he climbed. They cleared the wall in record time, landing on the other side with matching smiles. Around them, the other pairs were also moving through the course, each one demonstrating the unique strengths and strategies they had developed. Todoroki and Shinso worked together, Todoroki creating an ice ramp that Shinso used to gain a quick advantage, while Bakugo and Kurashima tore through the obstacles with explosive power and unbreakable determination. The final stretch of the course involved a series of suspended ropes, requiring balance and agility. Izuku and Uraraka moved carefully, supporting each other as they navigated the ropes with ease. When they reached the end, they sprinted to the finish line, crossing it together in a burst of exhilaration. As they caught their breath, Uraraka turned to Izuku, her face flushed with excitement. "We did it! And with our quirks, it felt amazing." Izuku nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "Yeah, it really did. It's like, we're finally using our quirks in a way that feels true to us." The rest of the class soon finished, each pair crossing the line with triumphant grins and celebratory high-fives. They gathered around, exchanging stories of the course, laughter and camaraderie filling the air. Aizawa and All Might observed from the sidelines, their expressions reflecting quiet pride as they watched their students interact. The second challenge involved a rescue simulation, a scenario that required strategic thinking and cooperation. The objective was to locate and rescue a series of training dummies scattered throughout the field, each one representing a civilian in need of help. This time, Aizawa gave them free rein to use their quirks however they saw fit, testing their ability to adapt and prioritize. Izuku's team was quick to formulate a plan. They split up, each member focusing on a specific area, but they remained in constant communication, coordinating their efforts to ensure that each civilian was accounted for. Izuku and Todoroki found one dummy trapped beneath a pile of rubble, and they worked in perfect sync, Todoroki using his ice to stabilize the structure while Izuku carefully lifted the debris with his enhanced strength. When they freed the dummy, Todoroki gave him a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of their teamwork. "I couldn't have done that alone," Todoroki admitted, his voice filled with a rare vulnerability. "Thank you, Midoriya." Izuku felt a warmth in his chest, realizing just how far Todoroki had come, how open he had become with his feelings. "Anytime. We're a team, after all." Nearby, Jairu and Shinso worked together, Jairu using her sound waves to locate hidden dummies, while Shinso coordinated the team's movements, ensuring that no one area was overlooked. The level of trust and coordination they displayed was a testament to the growth they had each undergone, a reflection of the unity that bound them. When the final dummy was retrieved, Aizawa signaled the end of the exercise, and the students regrouped, their faces shining with pride and accomplishment. They had completed the challenges not only with skill, but with a sense of purpose and unity that went beyond training. All Might stepped forward, his voice filled with admiration. "You have all shown incredible growth. The strength you've found in yourselves and each other is something that can't be taught in any classroom. You've proven that heroes are made not just by power, but by heart." Aizawa nodded, his gaze steady. "Remember this feeling. It's a reminder of what you're capable of when you work together, when you trust in your own strengths and those of your teammates. Carry that with you, always. As they made their way back to the dorms, Izuku walked beside Todoroki, a sense of contentment settling over him. He knew that they had only just begun to unlock their potential, that the journey ahead would be filled with new challenges. But he also knew that they were ready, not only as individuals, but as a team. That night, the class gathered in the common room, celebrating their achievements with snacks and laughter. The bonds they had formed felt unbreakable, each one a testament to the strength they had found within themselves and each other. As they sat together, sharing stories and dreams of the future, Izuku felt a quiet certainty settle over him. They were more than just heroes in training. They were a family, bound by courage, trust, and the promise to always stand by each other. And as they looked to the future, they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, stronger than ever. Chapter 20, The Promise of Tomorrow. The final days of the semester dawned with a sense of quiet nostalgia. Class 1 as Quirkless Experiment had concluded, but its legacy lingered in the hearts of each student. Every training session, every hallway conversation, and every shared glance held the memory of their journey, a journey that had shaped them into heroes, not just in power but in spirit. On a crisp, clear morning, Aizawa gathered the class for one last assembly on the grounds where they had completed so many challenges. The students stood in a circle, their expressions a mix of pride and sentimentality as they waited for their teacher to speak. Aizawa's gaze swept over them, and for a moment, he said nothing, letting the silence fill the space. At last, he spoke, his voice filled with a rare warmth. Class 1A, he began, you have faced challenges that few others would have endured. You've proven to yourselves, and to each other, that being a hero is about far more than just power. The bonds you've formed, the resilience you've developed, will carry you forward in ways you can't yet imagine. All Might stepped forward, his gaze filled with pride. You've grown not only as heroes, but as individuals. I've watched you learn to trust yourselves and each other, to find strength in places you didn't know existed. That is the true spirit of heroism, and you embody it. The students stood in silence, each one feeling the weight of the moment. They had come so far, yet this felt like just the beginning. The world awaited them, filled with challenges they had yet to face, but now, they knew they were ready. Izuku glanced around at his classmates, his friends, his family. His heart swelled with gratitude for each of them, their support, their courage, their unbreakable spirit. Without a word, he stepped forward, turning to face the group. Before we go, he said, his voice steady with emotion, I want to make a promise. To each of you. No matter what happens, no matter where we go from here, I'll always remember what we've shared. The strength we found together, it's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Todoroki joined him, his expression calm, but resolute. Me too. We found something here that goes beyond training. It's a bond that can't be broken. I promise to honor it, always. Kirishima grinned, his eyes bright with pride. I'm in too. We've got each other's backs, no matter what. I promise to always stand by you all, my friends and family. One by one, the rest of the class stepped forward, each making their own promise. Jairo vowed to trust in her strength, Bakugo promised to push everyone to be their best, Yaoyorozu pledged to use her knowledge and power for the greater good, and Uraraka committed to always supporting her friends, no matter where life took them. As they finished, Aizawa took a small box from his pocket, revealing a set of simple silver pins, each one engraved with a symbol unique to Class 1A. These are a reminder of everything you've accomplished here, he said, handing each student a pin. Wear them with pride. You are more than heroes in training. You are a team, a family. And that will never change. Izuku held his pin in his hand, running his thumb over the smooth surface, feeling the weight of it in his palm. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a promise, a testament to the strength they had found in each other. All Might's voice filled the quiet space. The world needs heroes like you, heroes who know that true power comes from within. Go forward with courage, with hope, and with the promise that you will always have each other to rely on. As the students pinned the symbols onto their uniforms, a sense of unity filled the air. They were no longer just students of Class 1A, they were a team bound by trust, by resilience, and by the memories of a journey they would carry with them forever. The class spent the rest of the day together, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. They talked about their dreams for the future, the challenges they wanted to face, and the heroes they aspired to become. Each one of them carried a new sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the world. As evening fell, they gathered on the rooftop one last time, watching the sunset cast a warm glow over the campus. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, a beautiful farewell to the journey they had completed. Izuku stood with Todoroki, Uraraka, and Kurashima by his side, his heart filled with a quiet certainty. This was just the beginning. They had found their strength, their purpose, and their family. And together, they were ready to face whatever came next. In the fading light, they each made one last silent promise, to carry the spirit of Class 1A forward, to honor the journey they had shared, and to be heroes in every sense of the word. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, the students of Class 1A turned toward the future, knowing that they were stronger, braver, and more united than ever before. And with that, they stepped forward into the promise of tomorrow, their hearts full, their spirits unbreakable, ready to change the world, together. This is the end of Quirkless Society Experiment by the Angel Demon. If you have any suggestion, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to know when the next one is out. Have a good day, angels.